Here's my question. Yesterday, I read this article. This is from April 5th, and today is the 10th. So this was just from last week. And it got no coverage in the mainstream media, none, which really surprised me, that the Indiana Court of Appeals, now keep in mind, let me back up a little bit. When the Dobbs decision came down, saying that, you know, states can outlaw abortion if they want, the first state to take advantage of it was Indiana. And they passed basically a complete ban on abortion, a 6-week ban. And the ACLU of Indiana sued, and they sued on behalf of 5 anonymous Jewish, Muslim, and spiritual, they call them plaintiffs, and a group called Hoosier Jews for Choice. The spiritual group actually called themselves pagans. So no Christians, no self-professed Christians in this bunch, but Jews, Muslims, pagans, and this group Jews for Choice. And their argument was that their religion not only allows for abortion, but in some cases mandates abortion. And they could demonstrate this, you know, through sacred text and customs and practices and all kinds of things. So under the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, which was signed into law by Mike Pence, well, in fact, when he signed it, this is when he was governor, he said, the freedom of religion for every Hoosier is enshrined in the Constitution of the United States and the Indiana Constitution, blah, 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 blah. For generations, these protections have served as a bulwark for liberty. So what these people claimed was because their religion allows for abortion, therefore, they don't have to comply with the abortion law in Indiana. You know, just like the Masterpiece Cake guy said, I don't want to bake a cake for a gay couple. And so the anti-discrimination laws don't apply to me because I'm a Christian. Or the woman from Colorado who had the web design company that had literally never been asked to design a website for a gay marriage, a gay wedding, but thought that might happen and took it all the way to the Supreme Court, which should not have happened because there was no injury. But in any case, it's basically the same argument. It's the Hobby Lobby argument. We shouldn't have to pay the insurance companies for health care that includes birth control and abortion. And the insurance companies won't provide us with a policy that excludes birth control and abortion because of federal law. And the Supreme Court said, well, that federal law is wrong. And now Hobby Lobby can buy health insurance for its people that doesn't provide them with abortion or contraception care. That one was particularly weird because it was a corporation suing, saying that its religious liberties were being violated. A corporation. So they quoted, in fact, they actually quoted the Burwell v. Hobby Lobby case. This is from one of the 3 justices on the Indiana Court of Appeals, saying, if a corporation can engage in a religious exercise by refusing to provide abortifacients, contraceptives that essentially abort a pregnancy after fertilization, it stands to reason that a pregnant person can engage in a religious exercise by pursuing an abortion. Now, here's more from the decision by the Indiana Appeals Court. The state does not explain why a victim of rape or incest is entitled to an abortion, but women whose sincere religious beliefs direct an abortion are not. Now, these were all Republicans, by the way. Three Republican appointees. Again, from the ruling, both judges Melissa S. May and L. Mark Bailey concurred with Judge Weissman's opinion. This is from Bailey, the one man in the group. It was 2 women and a man. He writes, indeed, where theologians cannot agree, legislators are ill-equipped to define when life begins. And that's really the argument here, right? It is a religious argument. He goes on to say, in a more perfect world, each pregnant woman, in evaluating her options, would have no burden beyond examining her individual conscience, counseling with her spiritual advisor, and consulting with her medical provider. But a perfect world this is not, and resulting pregnancy is not always a simple free will contract or agreement. He goes on to say, legislators, and he's pointing out here that only 1/4 of the legislators in Indiana are women. 3/4 are men. And speaking to that, he says, and I quote, legislators, an overwhelming majority of whom have not experienced childbirth, nevertheless dictate that virtually all pregnancies in this state must proceed to birth, notwithstanding the onerous burden upon women and girls. They have done so not based on science or viability, but upon a blanket assertion that they are the protectors of, quote, life from the moment of conception. So this happened, right? Now it's this appeals court decision is on hold pending an appeal to the Supreme Court of Indiana. And I'm guessing the Supreme Court of Indiana will probably strike it down, but who knows? But it raises a question for me. Given that this decision has happened, that the Indiana Appeals Court has established at least a minor precedent, are there other things that people could use religion? There's either 16 or 21 states, I forget which, that have their own Religious Freedom Restoration Act, RFRAs, in law. And there's the federal RFRA law that was passed, I think, in 1994. I'd have to go back and look. But here's my question. I consider myself a Christian, for example. I don't go to church, but I try to follow the teachings of Jesus. And he was pretty explicit in Matthew 25. The only way to get into heaven, and in other words, the only way to really be a Christian, is to feed the hungry, heal the sick, house the homeless, and have compassion for those in prison. I mean, you can read it right there in the Bible. And, and he's very clear. He says, in the final days, those who didn't do this, they're going to hell, the goats, and those who did, they're going with me, the sheep. So is there some way that I could, or any of us could, who believe religiously that the appropriate thing is to be providing food stamps to poor families, is to be feeding children in public schools, is to be providing housing to the homeless, is to be having a national health care system, Medicare for all, so that nobody is denied healing that Jesus mandated? Is there a way that we can use these things for a positive benefit, rather than just preventing a negative outcome? Now, so far, all of the RFRA rulings have been people getting exceptions to law. Right? In Indiana, these women got an exception to the anti-abortion law. In the Masterpiece Cake piece, the guy got an exception to the anti-discrimination law. In the case of the web designer, got an exception to the anti-discrimination laws, and on and on and on. I mean, they're all, let me out of the law that I don't like, essentially, because of my religion. So my question, and what I'm really struggling with, I wrote a whole piece yesterday afternoon that was going to be my article for today, and then I hit this barrier, which is this question that I'm presenting to you. Is there a way to say my religion mandates this, therefore government must do it? As opposed to my religion mandates this, therefore government can't prevent me from doing it. Do you understand what I'm saying? This is, up until now, all the RFRA things have been personal actions that people want to engage in that they're prohibited by law from doing. I'm trying to figure out how to use these same religious freedom acts to promote a positive good as opposed to avoiding a negative. And I haven't been able to come up with it. And I'm really struggling with this. And if you have, if any of you out there who are, smart about the law, have any ideas or suggestions, we can brainstorm them together. In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the hartmannreport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com.
We say fight back!
The Thom Hartmann Book Club today, our book is by Frantz Fanon, and it's The Wretched of the Earth. This is from the chapter on national culture on page 145. It sort of reads like Thomas Paine, actually. Each generation must discover its mission, fulfill it, or betray it in relative opacity. In the underdeveloped countries, preceding generations have simultaneously resisted the insidious agenda of colonialism and paved the way for the emergence of the current struggles. Now that we are in the heat of combat, we must shed the habit of decrying the efforts of our forefathers or feigning incomprehension at their silence or passiveness. They fought as best they could with the weapons they possessed at the time, and if their struggle did not reverberate throughout the international arena, the reason should be attributed not so much to a lack of heroism, but to a fundamentally different international situation. More than one colonized subject had to say, "We've had enough." More than one tribe had to rebel. More than one peasant revolt had to be quelled. More than one demonstration had to be repressed for us to stand firm, certain of our victory. For those of us who are determined to break the back of colonialism, our historic mission is to authorize every revolt, every desperate act, and every attack aborted or drowned in blood. In this chapter, we'll analyze the fundamental issue of the legitimate claim to a nation. The political party that mobilizes the people, however, is little concerned with this issue of legitimacy. Political parties are concerned solely with daily reality, and it is in the name of this reality, in the name of this immediacy which influences the present and future of men and women, that they make their call to action. The political party may very well speak of the nation in emotional terms, but it is primarily interested in getting the people who are listening to understand that they must join in the struggle if they quite simply want to exist. We now know that in the first phase of the national struggle, colonialism attempts to diffuse nationalist demands by manipulating economic doctrine. At the first sign of a dispute, colonialism feigns comprehension by acknowledging with ostentatious humility that the territory is suffering from serious underdevelopment that requires major social and economic reforms. And it is true that certain spectacular measures, such as the opening of work sites for the unemployed here and there, delay the formation of a national consciousness by a few years. But sooner or later, colonialism realizes it is incapable of achieving a program of socioeconomic reforms that would satisfy the aspirations of the colonized masses. Even when it comes to filling their bellies, colonialism proves to be inherently powerless. The colonial state very quickly discovers that any attempt to disarm the national parties at a purely economic level would be tantamount to practicing in the colonies what it did not want to do in its own territory. And it is no coincidence that today the doctrine of Cartierism is on the rise just about everywhere. Cartier's bitter disillusionment with France's stubborn determination to retain ties with people it will have to feed, whereas so many French citizens are in dire straits, reflects colonialism's inability to transform itself into a nonpartisan aid program. Hence, once again, no need to waste time repeating, better to go hungry with dignity than to eat one's fill in slavery. On the contrary, we must persuade ourselves that colonialism is incapable of procuring for colonized people the material conditions likely to make them forget their quest for dignity. Once colonialism is understood where its social reform tactics would lead it, back come the old reflexes of adding police reinforcements, dispatching troops, and establishing a regime of terror
better suited to its interests and its psychology. Within the political parties, or rather parallel to them, we find the cultured class of colonized intellectuals. The recognition of a national culture and its right to exist represent their favorite stomping ground. Whereas the politicians integrate their action in the present, the intellectuals place themselves in the context of history. Faced with the colonized intellectuals' debunking of the colonist theory of a pre-colonial barbarism, colonialism's response is mute. It is especially mute since the ideas put forward by the young colonized intelligentsia are widely accepted by metropolitan specialists. It is in fact now commonly recognized that for several decades, numerous European researchers have widely rehabilitated African, Mexican, and Peruvian civilizations. Some have been surprised by the passion invested by the colonized intellectuals in their defense of a national culture. But those who consider this passion exaggerated are strangely apt to forget that their psyches and their egos are conveniently safeguarded by the French or German culture, whose worth has been proven and which has gone unchallenged. I concede the fact that the actual existence of an Aztec civilization has done little to change the diet of today's Mexican peasant. I concede that whatever proof there is of the once mighty Songhai civilization does not change the fact that the Songhais today are undernourished, illiterate, abandoned to the skies and water, with a blank mind and glazed eyes. But as we have said on several occasions, this passionate quest for a national culture prior to the colonial era can be justified by the colonized intellectuals' shared interest in stepping back and taking a hard look at the Western culture in which they risk becoming ensnared. Fully aware that they're in the process of losing themselves and consequently of being lost to their people, these men work away with raging heart and furious mind to renew contact with their people's oldest inner essence, the furthest removed from colonial times. Let us delve deeper. Perhaps this passion and this rage are nurtured, or at least guided by the secret hope of discovering beyond the pleasant covetousness, beyond the self-hatred, something that redeems us.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Hey, is he going to make it through the trial? People are starting to wonder. Donald Trump keeps, like, closing his eyes. You know, I'm an old man here. I'm 77. Too many hamburgers? Is it a hamburger fog? Cheeseburgers. That's it, right? Who knows? Anyhow, we got a lot to talk about today. Bill Barr, the Republican Party's master fixer for decades, exposed. Also, looks like Maine is joining the interstate alliance to elect the president by popular vote. And a hate alert. Why is Tom Cotton suggesting protesters have their skin ripped off and be thrown off the bridge? Sounds kind of Pinochet, fascist, kind of Mussolini-like to me. I don't. That's just me, maybe. I'll tell you about that. In fact, we have a clip of it. Also, an honest assessment in the second hour of our program. An honest assessment of white rural rage is long overdue. I wrote about this last week, and the guys who wrote the book, White Rural Rage, and me in my article were both just like mercilessly attacked for it. They're fighting back, and I'll tell you about that at the top of the second hour of the program. And also in the second hour of the program, why are French youth telling pollsters that they are enthusiastic about signing up to fight in Ukraine for Ukraine? This is fascinating, an absolutely fascinating story. We'll get into that in the second hour of the program, too. In the third hour of the program, our single guest for the day, Sabrina Haake of the Haake Take over on Substack, is going to be with us. Is the arc of justice finally bending against big oil? Now, this could be very big news. And a Hunter in the Farmer's World alert, good German schools come to America. So a lot to talk about today. I want to start out with, the story that was, this was kind of the lead story for Rachel Maddow's program last night as well. It's getting around. Something she didn't mention, which is how I start my article, is, Congressman Jim Jordan wanted revenge on Alvin Bragg, the Manhattan District Attorney, for prosecuting Donald Trump, for the case that he's facing right now. He threatened Bragg with oversight, dragging him before his committee, threatening him with contempt of Congress, putting a right-wing target on Bragg's back by publicizing him to draw sharpshooters from as far away as Wyoming or Idaho. and facing the possibility of going to jail if he didn't answer Jordan's questions right. Jordan, James Comer, and Brian Steele, 3 chairmen of 3 different committees, wrote to Bragg, quote, "By July 2019, federal prosecutors determined that no additional people would be charged alongside Michael Cohen. Your apparent decision to pursue criminal charges where federal authorities declined to do so requires oversight." In other words, we're going to drag you before committees, Mr. Bragg, DA Bragg. You know, they were furious that Bragg would prosecute Donald Trump for a crime that the Department of Justice had decided back in 2019 didn't really need to be prosecuted. But why didn't Bill Barr's Department of Justice proceed after they had already put Michael Cohen in prison for a year for delivering the check that Donald Trump wrote, that Donald Trump authorized? Donald Trump was the guy who slept with Stormy Daniels, not Michael Cohen. And Donald Trump was the guy running for president whose campaign would have been badly affected had Stormy Daniels come out and told the truth to the public, as she tried to do via David Pecker and the National Enquirer. Had she told that story, Hillary Clinton would have become president. I mean, there's pretty much no doubt about that. You'll recall that there was this collective, gasp just a couple weeks before the election when the Access Hollywood tape came out. And a lot of evangelicals just started backing up and going, whoa, we hadn't realized how crazy this guy was. Well, if that had been followed in quick succession and it wasn't just talk, because the big excuse was, it's just locker room talk, it's just locker room talk. And I mean, even Melania came out and said, it's just locker room talk. He talks like that. Don't worry about it. He doesn't do that kind of thing. Well, it turns out he does. And had Stormy Daniels and Karen McDougal and the doorman, for that matter. This is another person who's going to be testifying in this trial. There was a doorman at the Trump Tower who was going to went to the National Enquirer and said, I got a story to sell. And the National Enquirer paid him off to catch and kill the story. And his story was that he had personal knowledge of a woman who had been going up to Trump Tower to sleep with Trump, and then brought the baby and said, this is his baby, to the doorman. So, it's like, had that stuff come out, Donald Trump would not have gotten elected. That evangelical vote would have melted away. I mean, keep in mind, he only won by 44,000 votes in 3 states. He won the Electoral College. I mean, he lost the popular vote by over 3 million votes. So why didn't Bill Barr's Department of Justice proceed after they'd already put Michael and Cohen in prison for a year for delivering the check that Donald Trump wrote, signed, and asked him to deliver? Well, it turns out that, according to Jeffrey Berman, the lifelong Republican and U.S. attorney appointed by Trump to run the prosecutor's office in the Southern District of New York, he wrote a book called Holding the Line, published in September of 2022, about his experiences in that area. And in that, he came right out and accused his boss, Bill Barr, of killing the federal investigation into Trump's directing and covering up that conspiracy in order to influence the 2016 election. The Washington Post noted when the book came out, quote, Berman says Barr stifled campaign finance investigations emanating from the Cohen case and even floated seeking a reversal of Cohen's conviction, just like Barr would later do with another Trump ally, Michael Flynn. Barr also intervened in the case of another Trump ally, Roger Stone, to seek a lighter sentence than career prosecutors wanted. This is why Manhattan DA Alvin Bragg had to pick up the case if the crime was going to be exposed and prosecuted. After all, this is the crime that literally turned the 2016 election to Trump and away from Hillary Clinton. And without it, all the polling and most political scientists argue that Hillary Clinton would have been our president for at least 4 years, and Trump would have retired into real estate obscurity. But Bill Barr put an end to Berman's investigation, according to Berman. The DOJ pretended to be investigating Trump for another few months, then quietly announced that they weren't going to continue the investigation. The news media responded with a shrug of the shoulders, and America kind of forgot that Cohen had committed the crime for which he spent a year in Rikers Island at the demand of his boss, Donald Trump. I mean, typically when somebody, like if you hire somebody to kill your husband or wife and they do it, you're going to go to jail too. You paid for the job, right? You commissioned the crime. Trump commissioned this crime. He should have gone to jail. Now, in 2023, the New York Times picked up Bill Barr's cover story and ran with it, ignoring Berman's claims, even though he was the guy in charge of the Southern District of New York. The article essentially reported that Maine justice wouldn't prosecute because Cohen wouldn't testify to earlier crimes, Trump might have been ignorant of the law, and that the decision was made by prosecutors in New York and not by Barr. It's pretty thin stuff. Incomplete testimony, ignorance of the law, that doesn't stop prosecutors from prosecuting people. But the story stuck, and the Times ran with it. By contrast, this is what Berman wrote in his book. This was the guy who was the lead prosecutor in the Southern District of New York. He wrote, while Cohen had pleaded guilty, our office continued to pursue investigations related to other possible campaign finance violations, including by Trump. When Barr took over in February 2019, he not only tried to kill the ongoing investigations, but incredibly suggested that Cohen's conviction on campaign finance charges be reversed. Barr summoned Rob Khuzami in late February to challenge the basis of Cohen's plea, as well as the reasoning behind pursuing similar campaign finance charges against other individuals, including Trump. The directive Barr gave Khuzami, which was amplified that same day by a follow-up call from O'Callaghan, was explicit. Not a single investigative step could be taken. Not a single document in our possession could be reviewed until the issue was resolved. And then about 6 weeks later, Khuzami returned to D.C. for another meeting about Cohen. He was accompanied by Bill Barr. And summarizing the story, Berman wondered out loud exactly why Bill Barr had sabotaged extending their investigation. He says, but Barr's posture here raises obvious questions. Did you think dropping the campaign finance charges would bolster Trump's defense against impeachment charges? Was he trying to ensure that no other Trump associates or employees would be charged with making hush money payments and perhaps flip on the president? Or was it part of an effort to undo the entire, was the goal to ensure that the president could not be charged after leaving office? I would answer yes. Or was it part of an effort to undo the entire series of investigations and prosecutions over the past 2 years of those in the president's orbits, Cohen, Roger Stone, and Michael Flynn? In retrospect, the answer appears to be yes to all of those. And that wasn't Barr's only time subverting justice while heading the Justice Department. Berman says he also ordered John Kerry investigated for possible prosecution for violating the Logan Act. Now, the Logan Act says that as a private individual, you can't interfere in foreign policy. You know, like Trump telling Mike Johnson not to provide aid to Ukraine. Which, by the way, just parenthetically, Mike Johnson says he's going to have a vote this week on aid to Ukraine. I strongly encourage you right now to call your member of Congress and say, pass that aid to Ukraine. The telephone number for the congressional switchboard, particularly if you're represented by a Republican, is 202-224-3121. So anyhow, this was just the latest Bill Barr outrage. I've shared with you before how Bill Barr bailed out George H.W. Bush when he was, facing the possibility of going to prison for having participated with Ronald Reagan's campaign. Bill Casey was running the campaign at the time, the former, who then was made CIA director by Reagan. And then when Casey said he was going to testify that Reagan, blew up the hostage deal, suddenly he had a seizure in his office at the CIA, got taken to Walter Reed, and they removed the part of his brain that controls speech. He was literally rendered speechless, the head of the CIA. It's pretty incredible when you think about it. So anyhow, Bill Barr up to his eyeballs once again as the GOP's master fixer for at least the last 30 or 40 years. It's an incredible story, just incredible. By the way, Donald Trump submits the details on securing bond. This is getting interesting. I'll tell you about that after the break, too.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And Maine and the Interstate Alliance to elect the president by the national popular vote. A lot of stuff to tell you about, and then I'll pick up your calls, so stay with us. And welcome back. Mike in Lomita, California. Hey, Mike, what's up?
Hey, Tom. There's been a little bit of speculation going around about Sleepy Don and why he was nodding off in his first criminal trial yesterday.
Right.
And I just put together a few facts which lead me to one area of speculation. One is that the man is now so obese, no tailor can possibly hide it. He's approaching the dimensions of a beach ball.
Mm-hmm.
Another is that...
Does that make people sleepy?
It can do, but...
I know overeating does, so maybe he's in the process of inflating himself.
Yeah. Well, he's an outspoken exponent of the Bart Simpson syndrome, which is that sees himself as a jock who's too cool for sports. So the limit of his physical activity seems to be that he gets out of the golf cart to kick his golf balls back onto the green out of the rough. Yeah. So lack of activation of the cardiopulmonary system on a continued basis, plus obesity, can lead to what's called Pickwickian syndrome. Now, it was first described in the literature by Charles Dickens in the Pickwick Papers. One of the characters is this very fat boy who's always asleep, sitting in his chair. So
I've never read the Pickwick Papers. Thank you for that, Mike.
Yeah. So I think that may explain what's happening with Trump nodding off beyond the speculations of overnight tweeting and
I'm betting on food
nationwide
stupor.
oil shortage.
I think that makes a lot of sense. He's been binging on cheeseburgers. And he doesn't have his Diet Cokes. I mean, apparently he drinks like 6 or 8 or 10 Diet Cokes a day. That's a massive amount of caffeine. If he's not sitting there slurping his Diet Cokes, he's probably going through caffeine withdrawal, too.
Yeah. Oh, by the way, the speculation on the voir dire process of jury selection, that people who answered that they're hopelessly biased,
Right.
I don't know about New York, but in California, certainly that does not get you through your jury duties. You're basically to be there is available for use for something of a specific period, like 2 weeks. And if you get bounced off your first case, you're still stuck in the pool.
I see. Okay, I didn't realize that. I've never been called for jury duty. Actually,
I've been called too much.
I was called last year, but I just sent the form back in saying I'm over 70, and I got out of it. But
oh, lucky for you.
yeah, it was in Oregon. Apparently, if you're over 70, you don't have to serve. But that was the first time, so which is kind of amazing. Although I've never lived more than 5 years in any state other than Oregon. So, well, actually, we lived about 10 years in Georgia. But maybe it's just because I move around a lot that I don't get called. I don't know.
Yeah. Anyway, that's my contribution for today.
That's a good one.
Pickwickian syndrome. It's a sure thing.
Yeah. Excessive cheeseburger syndrome.
Yes, and chocolate cake.
And chocolate. Yeah, he's probably chowing down the sugar too. Mike, thanks a lot for the call. Always nice to hear from you. It's 22 minutes past the hour. It's the Thom Hartmann Program, helping you win the water cooler wars. I'll be right back with more of the news of the day and your calls right after, well, in 60 seconds, right after this. Change starts with you. You can be calling your Democratic or Republican representatives to let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capitol switchboard. It'll get you right through to them. Back in the day, the Republicans had these kind of soft, big lies. Ronald Reagan telling us that if we just cut taxes on billionaires, it'll trickle down to all the rest of us. And climate change isn't caused by fossil fuels, of course. Voter fraud is caused by black people, and gays and lesbians and trans people want to convert your children. All these lies. Public school teachers are communists. They really are not working. So now the Republicans have a new strategy. Because their lies are not working, including their lies about COVID and about Russia and about the media and everything in public schools, abortion. Because their lies aren't working, they're actually going after university-level researchers who look into how lies are created and propagated across social media and in the media and in politics. It's an amazing story, reported by both the Washington Post and the New York Times. I got a whole rant about it over at hartmannreport.com. Check it out. Welcome back. A couple of quick stories. Number one, Maine, Democratic Governor Janet Mills just let the bill become law without her signature that adds Maine's 4 electoral college votes to the National Popular Interstate Compact, Popular Vote Interstate Compact, NPVIC. I wrote about this about 2 weeks ago when the Maine legislature passed this, and it's now officially law. Republicans almost unanimously opposed that legislation. The compact's 18 current states, which includes Washington, D.C., so it's 17 states plus D.C., currently have 209 of the 270 electoral votes needed because Republicans have typically opposed the agreement, writes Stephen Wolf for Daily Kos Elections. Because Republicans have typically opposed the agreements, its ultimate passage will likely rely on Democrats winning power in several more states. That could happen by 2028 as there's a tough yet real path to victory. Compact moved closer, they note, or Steve Wolf notes, to the 270 mark last year due to Democratic-led drives in Minnesota, which added 10 electoral votes to the compact, and in Nevada, which took the first step in a multi-year process to add its 6 votes. That will happen by 2026. Michigan, the State House Committee advanced a bill to add their 15 electoral votes to the alliance. The Senate, however, has yet to take action. The House has been tied since November after 2 Democrats were elected, but there's special elections for those seats on Tuesday, so that's today, actually. So that could move forward, too. Meanwhile, Donald Trump submitted his bond. You'll recall from this kind of, interesting bank guy out in California, the guy who makes his money, harassing people with phone calls when they don't pay their high-interest auto loans. And Letitia James was saying, that ain't right. It's not the guy doesn't have enough collateral, and quack, quack, quack. So they had to submit their information by midnight yesterday, and they did. And according to some observers, it still may not work. They say the $175 million bond is collateralized by $175 million in cash held in a Charles Schwab account. But the Daily Beast reads that Knight has a first priority lien on the Schwab account. So it's getting weird. I mean, it's entirely possible Letitia James could be going after Trump's properties soon.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Interestingly, this story is getting almost no coverage in the media because everybody's following the jury selection blow by blow. But this is a big deal.
Club is The Age of Illusions, How America Squandered Its Cold War Victory by Andrew Bacevich. This is from the introduction. Without the Cold War, what's the point of being an American? Henry Rabbit Angstrom, novelist John Updike's late 20th century everyman, posed that question just as the long twilight struggle was winding down. More than a quarter of a century later, Rabbit's plaintive query still awaits a definitive answer. Indeed, the passage of time has only sown confusion about whether there is a point to being an American. Even as the Cold War was ending, Updike's surrogate was not alone in feeling at a loss. By the 1980s, the Cold War had become more than a mere situation or circumstance. It was a state of mind. As had Rabbit, most Americans had come to take its existence for granted. Like the polar ice cap or baseball's status as the national pastime, it had acquired an appearance of permanence. So its passing caught Rabbit's fellow citizens unawares. Those charged with managing the Cold War were, if anything, even more surprised. The enterprise to which they had devoted their professional lives had suddenly vanished. Here was a contingency that the sprawling U.S. national security apparatus, itself a product of the anti-communist crusade, had failed to anticipate. At one level, of course, the surprise could not have been more gratifying. In the epic competition against pitting West against East, the God-fearing against the godless, and democracy against totalitarianism, our side had won. All-out nuclear war had been averted. The cause of freedom, which Americans felt certain they themselves embodied, had prevailed. Victory was decisive, sweeping, and unequivocal. In another sense, however, the passing of the Cold War could not have been more disorienting. In 1987, a senior advisor to Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev had warned, "We are going to do a terrible thing to you. We are going to deprive you of an enemy." As the Soviet Union passed out of existence, Americans were left not just without that enemy, but without even a framework for understanding the world and their place in it. However imperfectly, the Cold War had, for several decades, offered a semblance of order and coherence. The collapse of communism shattered that framework. Where there had been purposefulness and predictability, now there was neither. Winning the Cold War brought Americans face to face with a predicament comparable to that confronting the lucky fellow who wins the Mega Millions lottery. Hidden within an apparent windfall is the potential for monumental disaster. Putting that windfall to good use while avoiding the pitfalls inherent in suddenly acquiring riches calls for prudence and self-awareness. Not easily demonstrated when the big house, luxury car, and vacation condo you've always wanted are yours for the asking. Similarly, the end of the Cold War might have given Americans pause, especially since the issues at hand were of considerably greater significance than homes, cars, and condos. At least in theory, the moment might have invited reflection on some first-order questions. What is the meaning of freedom? What does freedom allow? What obligations does it impose? Whom or what does it exclude? Of course, Americans had been wrestling with such questions since well before 1776, their answers evolving over time. During the several decades of the Cold War, however, the exigencies of the East-West rivalry had offered a reason to throttle down impulses to explore America's furthermost boundaries, or freedom's furthermost boundaries. Except on the fringes of American politics, most citizens accepted the word from Washington that their way of life was under grave threat. In the pecking order of national priorities, addressing that threat, defending freedom rather than enlarging it, tended to take precedence over other considerations. This is not to suggest that Cold War Americans were a complicated lot. They were not. From the 1950s, misleadingly enshrined as a decade of conformity, through the Reagan-dominated 1980s, domestic crises and controversies were constants. Among the issues energizing or enraging Americans were civil liberties, the nuclear arms race, mismanaged wars of dubious provenance, challenges to artistic tradition, left-wing and right-wing radicalism, crass materialism that coexisted with widespread poverty, and a host of simmering issues connected to race, sex, and gender. Yet through it all, an uncommon outlook centered on resistance to the red threat endured. For most citizens, most of the time, the Cold War itself was sufficient to explain the point of being an American. The collapse of the Soviet Empire between 1989 and 1991 robbed that outlook of its last vestiges of authority. Rarely, if ever, had the transition from one historical period to another occurred quite so abruptly, with such a precise set of demarcations, and with such profound implications. As if in an instant, the discipline that the Cold War had imposed vanished. The absurdity of defining reality as an either-or choice, red or dead, slave or free, good versus evil, now became blazingly apparent. The impact on American ambitions and expectations was akin to removing the governor from an internal combustion engine. Suddenly the throttle opened up. The future appeared equally promising, offering Americans a seemingly endless array of choices, while confronting them with few evident constraints. Everything seemed possible. Confident that an era of unprecedented U.S. economic, military, and cultural ascendancy now beckoned, members of an intoxicated elite threw caution to the winds. The book, The Age of Illusion, by Andrew Bacevich.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Did you know that every weekday we send out an email before the show giving you all the topics coming up so you can be fully informed and ready to interact with our program? Or that after the show we send out Sue's Stack, a list of every topic I've discussed along with clickable hot links to every source of information I've shared with you on the air? It's all completely free and available over at thom.tv, THOM.tv. Check it out. Welcome back. Two quick stories, and then I'm going to pick up your calls here. The first, the Supreme Court is hearing oral arguments right now about a federal law that says that if you disrupt an official proceeding of the federal government, you go to jail. Now, this is the law under which most of the January 6th protesters, rioters, whatever you want to call them, insurrectionists, seditionists, have been charged. Excuse me. And it is their defense lawyers who are arguing this before the Supreme Court. But it's also the law under which 2 of the 4 charges Donald Trump is facing in Judge Elaine Chutkan, I think. I'm forgetting her first name, but anyhow, Judge Chutkan's court, you know, the criminal felony trial of Donald Trump for trying to overthrow our government. So, according to the Washington Post, and I quote, the Supreme Court seemed deeply divided Tuesday over a challenge to a federal law that prosecutors used to charge more than 350 people who were part of the pro-Donald Trump mob that attacked the U.S. Capitol. Several conservatives expressed concern about giving prosecutors broad power they suggested would allow the government to target peaceful protesters or hecklers who disrupt a court proceeding. Other justices seem to back the government, while some are interested in finding a way to limit the government's discretion to apply the statute in a way that might still allow the January 6 cases to proceed. The defense lawyers say that the prosecutors improperly stretched the law. So more than 100 people have been convicted of this, and like I said, 2 of the 4 charges Trump faces are based on this law. Tanya Chutkan, thank you. So it's entirely possible that that by the time Donald Trump gets to Tanya Chutkan's court, the January 6th case, that he'll only be facing 2 charges instead of 4. Keep an eye on this. Their decision will, in all probability, not come down until June. Meanwhile, fascist much? You know, fascism, the core, the absolute core of fascism is violence. Fascism and violence, you know, go together like peanut butter and jelly. And you pretty much can't have fascism without threats of violence. It's the cardinal characteristic of fascism. And so when you hear Republican politicians saying, oh, yeah, we should just rip the skin off these people, or we should just, you know, throw them out of helicopters, or just toss them off the top of a bridge, you pretty much know you're listening to a fascist. Case in point, Arkansas Senator Thom Cotton.
I agree with you that you have to get to these criminals early. If something like this happened in Arkansas on a bridge there, let's just say I think there'd be a lot of very wet criminals that have been tossed overboard, not by law enforcement, but by the people whose road they're blocking. If they glued their hands to a car or the pavement, well, probably pretty painful to have their skin ripped off. But I think that's the way we'd handle it in Arkansas, and I would encourage most people anywhere that get stuck behind criminals like this who are trying to block traffic to take matters in their own hands. There's only usually a few of them, and there's a lot of people being inconvenienced. It's time to put an end to this nonsense.
Yeah, take matters into your own hands. Just throw those protesters off the bridge or rip the skin off their hands. What kind of ass talks like that? A fascist ass. I mean, need I ask? All righty. So what's on your mind here today? Oscar in Los Angeles. Hey, Oscar, what's up?
Hey, Tom. Good morning. Hey, you mentioned something. First of all, first-time caller, long-time listener.
Thank you.
I think your show is great. You mentioned something, and again, I don't want to sound like a conspiracy theorist, but during the State of the Union, I'm kind of going back because I've been trying to call in to talk to you. During the State of the Union, you mentioned that Viktor Orban visited Mar-a-Lago and that sometimes these guys bring a diplomatic ouch that nobody could see.
That's correct.
Has anybody ever thought about maybe, Trump receiving some kind of passport in order to escape? Because I don't see Trump handling jail very easily, and most of the time, most dictators and fascists, they run. I mean, it's been proven through history that they run, and if he's in another country where they're going to give him immunity or they can't extradite him back, he could create a lot of havoc from someplace else as well. I just want to bring that up because I don't know if anybody's ever thought about that.
Yeah, there has been some speculation about that. It wouldn't require Viktor Orban bringing him another passport. With a U.S. passport, you can go pretty much anywhere in the world, including Russia. Although my guess is that if Trump were to flee, he would probably flee to Oman, where they are building a $5 billion complex right now that includes a new Trump hotel. It's going to be interesting to see, what happens. I'm guessing, though, that Trump is betting that one of two things is going to happen. Either one, some Trump follower, some, dyed-in-the-wool QAnon hardcore MAGA believer is going to lie his way onto the jury or her way onto the jury and then hang the jury, which would get Trump off. Or that even if he's convicted, because he's a white guy and a billionaire and in his 70s, he's not going to actually get time in jail like Michael Cohen did. Instead, he's just going to get like home confinement with an ankle bracelet for a while, and a whole lot of exceptions from that to be able to go out and campaign. So I think he's figuring the worst that's going to happen to him is that he'll be inconvenienced. We'll see, Oscar, but it's a good question. It's a legitimate concern, I think, and I think you were right to raise it, and I appreciate that. Thank you, Oscar, for the call. Roger in Maple Valley, Washington. Hey, Roger, what's on your mind today?
Awesome. Professor Thom Hartmann, I highly respect your opinion. I am educated by you daily. So I so appreciate you getting my call so fast. I believe that Trump has been the most dangerous president in history. However, he was enabled by another horrible president. And it's been my belief that in 1913, Woodrow Wilson got together with J.P. Morgan and Carnegie et al. On Jekyll Island to be able to enable the corporatization of America. Yesterday, you mentioned that some people are intending to be sovereign citizens, and you mentioned criteria where their names were in all caps, etc. This has to do with that. I need you to straighten me out on my belief. I love our country. I love the freedom of religion that is provided to us and allow migration to be encouraged, etc. However, I've evaluated that there has been an effort to corporatize the corporatization of America so that corporations can be persons. And in order to support political parties to sway elections, for lobbying, money to Supreme Courts and lower courts, and I believe that when they weren't able to give corporations personhoods, so instead they enabled people to be corporations, and that's why back in 1913, all people were designated to be in capital letters when it comes to voting. They wanted people to be corporations so that there can be communication and to increase this possibility of fascism in the United States.
Yeah.
All caps on birth certificates, all caps on driver's licenses.
Yeah.
All our names
Roger, I got it.
Yes.
I got it. This is one of the more bizarre and untruthful conspiracy theories that has been promoted for, probably 5-6 decades now in the United States. It's become part of the QAnon epistemology. And but it's much loved by the sovereign citizen folks, and it's complete BS. Americans are not corporations. America is not a corporation. Corporate personhood was first established in 1815 in a Supreme Court decision called Dartmouth v. somebody, I forget who it was, might have been the U.S., in which the Supreme Court recognized that a corporation had the corporate personhood, not human personhood, but they had to have some sort of status in order to pay taxes and to be sued and to own land. And so they acknowledged, so in 1815, the Supreme Court recognized Dartmouth, which at that time was actually a foreign corporation, as a corporation. Corporate personhood went a big step farther beyond that in 1886 in the Southern Pacific Railroad case, and then, became, and then corporations achieved the rights of persons to, under the Bill of Rights in 1978 in the First National Bank versus Bellotti Supreme Court decision. But none of that has to do with whether your name is in all caps or not. That's completely irrelevant. It's meaningless. It means absolutely nothing. And, that's it. I mean, corporations were given rights by the Supreme Court that, in my opinion, they shouldn't have. But this whole theory that people are corporations and America is a corporation and you can get out of it and you don't have to pay your taxes if you just,
This is not I am very upset that corporations have such a sway when it comes to elections and buying off.
I'm with you, but that has nothing to do with 1913. That has nothing to do with the creation of the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve was created in order to stabilize the currency of the United States. It's our federal bank, and pretty much every country in the world has an equivalent of that. You pretty much have to. The problem was that when we were on the gold standard and all those things were being handled just by the Treasury Department, as the economy grew, the country had to have more and more gold in order to have the currency grow along with the economy. If the currency couldn't grow as fast as the economy, then the problem that you encountered was that the currency would have to become more and more valuable, and that would cripple the economy. You'd have what's the equivalent of deflation, and or the uncontrollable strengthening of the currency. It's the opposite of inflation, or deflation, where but this would be deflation. It's the opposite of inflation. And that's basically why the Fed came into being. And I'm not a huge fan of the Fed, but if we did away with the Fed tomorrow, we would drop into a depression like you ain't never seen before. I mean, it would just be a disaster.
It's just that I'm highly upset about fascism, and I don't want to drop into the fascism aspect as well. So I really appreciate your input on that, and thank you for at least quelling my
You're welcome,
belief
Roger.
in that.
You're welcome. Take a deep breath. It's people have been filling you with or trying to shovel BS at you. You can relax. Roger, appreciate the call. It's 47 minutes past the hour. We'll be back in 60 seconds.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archive.
Actually, we'll be back in a couple of minutes. Stay tuned. And welcome back. Bill in Cleveland, Ohio. Hey, Bill, what's up?
Hi. Thank you very much for taking my call.
My pleasure.
I had a couple of questions for you. I've been following the stock of Truth Social, Trump's corporation, and it's taken quite a dive in the last week. Mm-hmm. It opened at $70 a share when it first came out on the market. Now it's down to $23 a share.
Right. I think it's heading for penny stock status. I mean, this is a corporation that lost $48 million last year on revenue of $4 million. This is a company that has no business being even traded on the New York Stock Exchange.
Yeah, I agree. I don't understand how the SEC ever allowed this. It's just.
The way they did it is this SPAC, this special purpose corporation, This is a new thing that which uses loopholes in the law, basically, that just was developed in the last decade or two. They created this corporation that could, that was basically supposed to be an investment vehicle, a corporation that can acquire other corporations. And that corporation got itself listed on the stock exchange, or did the initial stuff to get itself listed on the stock exchange. And it was supposed to, when it was not supposed to have a particular corporation in mind to buy when it went through that process. Apparently, these people lied about this. I mean, there was apparently fraud involved with this as well. And then they did this merger with Trump World Media, which is Truth Social. And, so now basically that's the one thing that gives this SPAC its value, its asset base, other than the original money that was put into it. And so, that's why I think we're going to see Trump, DJT is the stock indicator, is the ticker name or whatever you call it.
Yeah.
I think you're going to see it under $1.
It seems to be going in that direction. There's multiple lawsuits from his original partners, and there's all kinds of things.
They're suing him. He's suing them. It's a mess.
No, it is. It truly is. And today they came out with a corporate statement. They're releasing some kind of a streaming content, which they say is going to focus on live TV networks, offering religious channels, family-friendly content, documentaries, and other content that has been canceled or is at risk of cancellation, being suppressed by the major media.
In other words, they're gonna become a streaming platform they're going to compete with like Newsmax, right? Which, instead of being on TV stations, exists on the internet. Maybe they've got some stations, I don't know, but they're going to become an online TV channel for all the weird and bizarre crackpot conspiracy stuff that nobody else wants to touch. Is that what you're saying, Bill?
Right. Yeah, I don't understand how they're going to get any corporate sponsors with a plan like that. It doesn't seem like there's any...
Not sure they need it. I mean, they can follow the Alex Jones pioneered this business model. You hustle vitamins on your program, and you buy the vitamins for $1 and you sell them for $50, and you get enough rubes to buy your vitamins, you can make a lot of money. And they toss in tennis shoes and Bibles, right?
That's true.
Yeah, there you go. It's called direct marketing.
I still wouldn't buy stock in the company, though.
Yeah, there you go. I'm with you, Bill. Bill, thanks for the call. It's 9 minutes before the hour. Help support Progressive Radio. If you're listening to us on a commercial station, call their advertisers and let them know you're listening. If you're listening to us on Pacifica, one of our many nonprofit stations, please support them when they do their fundraising drives. Thanks for supporting Progressive Talk Radio, and tag you're it. So when was the last time you heard some Republican ranting about how, like Ron DeSantis, Florida's where woke goes to die, and we're declaring war on woke, and all that kind of... Republicans have been using dog whistles for most of my lifetime to shout out to their generally white racist base against various minority groups. Richard Nixon was, we're law and order, and as John Ehrlichman pointed out, his whole war on drugs was basically a war on black people and hippies. George Herbert Walker Bush had Willie Horton. George W. Bush had the Muslims. Donald Trump, it's the Mexican rapists. It just never ends. Woke is just the latest dog whistle they've got. So the next time somebody uses that phrase, just, ask them, what are you talking about here? Are you just trying to tell me that you're a bigot? I mean, what are you really saying? There's a whole rant about this over at HartmannReport.com. Check it out. "53 minutes past the hour, picking up your calls here. Jeff in Cambridge, Minnesota. Hey, Jeff, what's on your mind today? Thanks for listening to KTNF.
I just wanted to question something about the multi-state compact.
Mm-hmm.
And Minnesota's in it. I'm really agreeing to that. I think it's great. But what would be the answer to a question of, isn't this fake electors? how does that get around that?
Well, the fake electors were fake because the state hadn't authorized them to be the legitimate electors. And
okay.
But the Constitution says that the state can choose their electors any way they want. They can order their electors to vote for any particular candidate they want. You know, the will of the people is not a factor in the Electoral College. It's just that over the last 180 years or so, or a little longer than that actually, about 200 years or so, every state, one after another, has written a law that says that whoever wins the state, the majority of the vote in the state, gets all of the state's electors. Now, there's two exceptions to that. Maine and Nebraska, they cut it in half. You know, they cut their states in half, and each part of the state does that. But basically, that's how it works. So the states could just as easily say, instead of giving our electors to whoever won the majority of the votes in our state, we're going to give our electors to whoever won the majority of votes in the country. And that's what the Interstate Compact says. And so if you've got states that represent 270 electoral votes, and they all commit to pledge those votes, regardless of how their state voted, they all commit to pledge those votes to whoever won the majority of the votes in the country, then the Electoral College, for all practical purposes, becomes irrelevant, and whoever wins the majority of votes in the United States becomes president, which is how it should be, frankly.
Well, I agree, but aren't there going to be challenges to that, since the existing system says electoral votes go towards whoever won the state?
These are state
aren't there
laws.
Going to be challenges
right.
To
These are not federal laws. These are state laws. Each state has a law that says, you know, like here in Oregon, we've got a law that says, you know, whoever wins the majority of the votes in the state gets all of the electoral votes for president. So the new law, once you join the Interstate Compact, it's got a trigger point, and that is that when states equivalent to 270 electoral votes all sign up, then this law gets triggered into effect. And once that happens, once that law is triggered into effect, then whoever won the national vote, whoever got the most votes federally all across the United States, that candidate will get all of Oregon's votes, or all of Michigan's votes, or all of Maine's votes, or whatever, you know, all 270 votes.
Yeah, so triggering the 270 electoral votes, then automatically these states have agreed that they will change their state laws to cover that?
Yes, that is the law that they must pass in order to join the compact.
I got it. Okay.
And that's what they're doing. I mean, there's this model law that the people who put together the compact came up with, and then each state is actually just adopting that law as their state law. Now, the one fly in the ointment is that Republican state attorneys general, or secretaries of state rather, are planning on suing, you know, if and when this becomes law. They've already prepared a lawsuit before the Supreme Court to argue that this in and of itself is unconstitutional. I'm not sure exactly what their argument is. It doesn't. Their challenge doesn't make sense to me. But Republicans intend to fight this tooth and nail because, you know, the last Republican who was elected the first time, you know, who came into office as a consequence of winning the majority of the national votes was George Herbert Walker Bush in 1988.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
Tick, tick, tick.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the hartmannreport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com.
say fight back!
Today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is by Alan J. Lichtman, and it's titled Repeal the Second Amendment, The Case for a Safer America. This from the introduction, titled The Book That Must Be Written. On April 28, 1996, 28-year-old Martin Bryant stopped at an inn near his home of Newtown in Tasmania, Australia, and shot to death its two owners. He then drove to the former penal colony and tourist attraction of Port Arthur, where he lunched at a cafe. After eating, Bryant pulled from his sports bag a semi-automatic rifle with a 30-round magazine that he had legally purchased through a newspaper ad. With no provocation, he began firing at patrons in the cafe and its gift shop. Before the police stopped his shooting spree, Bryant had murdered 35 and wounded 18 others. His motive remains unknown. There were people everywhere, bodies, said witness Lynn Beavis. I thought at the time, being a nurse, I've seen dead people, I've seen blood, I've seen things like this, but what I saw in there, nobody but perhaps a soldier would know what that was like. The leadership of a shocked nation responded to the Port Arthur massacre, not with thoughts and prayers, but with decisive action. The country's conservative-led government rebuffed their gun lobby and its American ally, the NRA, to adopt comprehensive national gun controls. In a 2015 broadside labeled Australia, There Will Be Blood, the NRA charged that those regulations, which Australia significantly tightened as of 2002, have, quote, robbed Australians of their right to self-defense and empowered criminals. If the NRA was right, America, with its lax control over firearms for alleged self-defense, should be one of the world's safest countries, certainly far safer than Australia, where criminals presumably evade gun controls to prey on defenseless, law-abiding citizens. Yet in the latest reporting year, gun homicides claimed 14,542 American lives, compared to 27 in Australia. And all homicides took 19,510 American lives, compared to 222 in Australia. Since the NRA issued its warning, firearm homicides have declined in Australia, while soaring by 3,534 in the U.S. An American is now over 30 times more likely per capita than an Australian to be murdered by a gun, and 7 times more likely to be murdered by any means. If we had rates comparable today to Australia's, some 14,000 American lives would have been saved from firearm homicides in 2017 alone. By the gun lobby's twisted logic, Japan, which has one of the world's strictest gun control laws, should be drenched in innocent blood. Yet out of a population of 127 million, shooters in Japan murdered only 3 persons and injured only 5 in firearm assaults throughout 2017. Australia and Japan are not outliers. As compared to residents of our closest peer democracies in the G7 group of nations plus Australia, an American in 2017 was over 20 times more likely to die from a gun homicide. The gun lobby would have you forget that gun deaths are not limited to murders. In 2017, 23,854 Americans died from gun suicides, 64% more than were killed in firearm homicides. As compared to the peer nations, the 2017 per capita rate of firearm suicides in the United States was 7 times higher, while the rate of suicides by other means was 40% lower. These other democracies all have strict firearm regulations. None has a constitutional right to keep or bear arms, a distinction the United States shares worldwide only with Guatemala, whose gun murder rate is the 3rd highest of some 195 nations worldwide. Why has America lagged behind the democratic world in protecting its citizens from needless death and injury? The culprit is not spending by the NRA on campaigns and lobbying, which other pressure groups exceeded. The real problem is that which gun control advocates fear to name, the Second Amendment. Led by the NRA, the gun lobby exploits a historically defective, perverse reinvention of this amendment to inspire their grassroots supporters, sell guns, and provide constitutional cover for their opposition to making us safer by regulating firearms. The competing movement for gun control has floundered in response to the gun lobby's triumphant marketing of the Second Amendment. Gun control advocates have righteous zeal and noble motives, but lack a winning strategy. Instead of forthrightly refuting the lobby's bogus claims, the gun control movement has instead fallen into the trap of lamely insisting, "Oh, we support the Second Amendment, but we also support responsible gun control." With such a self-defeating strategy, the movement can never win. It plays on the gun lobby's home turf and fails to rally the American majority that favors stricter firearms regulations. It provokes only scorn from a gun lobby that dismisses yes but assurances as rank hypocrisy, and it ignores the clear history and the true meaning of the Second Amendment itself. The movement for gun control must strike hard with a new strategy. Repeal of the Second Amendment is not only right, but realistic. It would break open the political logjam and open a path for the comprehensive national gun control and safety measures that have eluded the American people for so long. None of these measures would confiscate firearms or stop Americans from using guns for hunting, sport shooting, antique collecting, or legitimate self-defense. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of the free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. These form the Second Amendment. Book Repeal the Second Amendment by Alan J. Lichtman.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Hey, welcome to the second hour of our program. You'll recall a week or so ago, I wrote a piece about white rage, specifically rural white rage, being a problem, shall we say. It's the foundation of the Trump vote and all that kind of thing. And in my piece, I was kind of basing it on the book Rural White Rage, but not really. I included a long list, maybe, I don't know, 15, 20 things, where red states are just, rural red states are in deep trouble compared to more urban blue states. Things like sexually transmitted diseases, teenage pregnancy, maternal mortality, drug addiction, high school and college dropping out, malnutrition, hookworm disease, and other parasites, type 2 diabetes, cancer, just the list, smoking, the list just went on and on and on. I felt that the book Rural White Rage was pretty solid, but one of the people whose research was cited in the book, in their own book, which was far more milquetoast, or from their own book, which was far more milquetoast, they wrote an op-ed for The Atlantic just going after the people who wrote this book, Rural White Rage. And similarly, a reporter in Politico wrote a kind of a hit piece on it. And when I published my piece, I got several phone calls from people on this program saying, hey, have you read this piece in The Atlantic or this piece in Politico? And are you sure you want to stand behind saying that, rural white rage is a thing and that it's out of control in rural areas and all that kind of thing? Are you sure you want to say it? And I was like, yeah, I stand behind this. In particular, I stand behind my article. I mean, the guys who wrote the book can defend themselves, but my article was absolutely solid. There's not a single thing in there that I can't back up. And in fact, they're all hot linked. Every single one of my assertions has a hot link to an article that substantiates my claim. So now Paul Waldman and Tom Schaller, they're the authors of White Rural Rage. The new threat to American democracy is, the subtitle is something like that. They just published a piece in the New Republic talking back to both Politico and The Atlantic. They're the authors of those two pieces. And what they're pointing out, well, this is interesting. This is just the first paragraph. Something remarkable happened among rural whites between the 2016 and 2020 elections. According to the Pew Research Center's validated voters study, as the rest of the country moved away from Donald Trump, rural whites lurched toward him by 9 points, from 62 to 71% support. And among the 100 counties where Trump performed best in 2016, almost all of them small and rural, he got a higher percentage of the vote in 91 of them in 2020. While we wrote when we wrote White Rural Rage, we knew that our provocative argument and book title would arouse ire on the right. We were not disappointed. And then they cite this article in Politico by Nicholas Jacobs and another in The Atlantic by Tyler Harper, who they note is, quote, an environmental studies professor who's made it a personal crusade to attack us and our book. They write, these pieces illustrate some of the very pathologies so common in the way scholars and pundits treat rural whites. And this is interesting. They go on to say, in recent years, research from political scientists showing some disturbing patterns of opinion among rural voters, especially rural whites, has begun to accumulate, but there is clear discomfort with the implications of this research, even among some of the researchers themselves. And they go on to say, we call this phenomenon the shouts and whispers approach to social science discourse about rural whites. If you find no difference between the political attitudes of rural whites and other Americans, you shout it from the rooftops. If you uncover transgressive political beliefs among rural whites, you whisper it in a conference panel with a dozen people in attendance and no media to be found. And they go on to say, no wonder what would happen if rural politics scholars took to the online pages of pieces like Politico and The Atlantic to describe their more troubling findings. Excuse me, we wonder what would happen. Actually, we don't have to wonder. Their inboxes would be filled with the hateful and threatening emails that we are receiving. They note, when it comes to rural resentments, again and again, these scholars insist that if rural whites were mad, it's only because they have good reason to be. And then they point out that they agree with that, and they pointed it out in their own damn article, or in their own damn book, that the hospitals are being closed, ambitious young people are leaving, pharmacies are shutting down, et cetera. They say what isn't said enough is that rural whites are being told to blame all the wrong people for their very real problems. As we argue in the book, Hollywood liberals didn't destroy the family farm. College professors didn't move manufacturing jobs overseas. Immigrants didn't pour opioids into rural communities. And critical race theory didn't close hundreds of rural hospitals. When Republican politicians and conservative media tell rural whites to aim their anger at these targets, it's so they won't ask why the people they keep electing haven't done anything to improve life in their communities. They note that, one of the two authors, the author of the Atlantic piece, Mr. Harper, Harper delivered a torrent of abuse at us on social media, calling us idiots and intellectual lightweights who wrote a dumb screed. He also called us soft-handed elites and claimed that our book says that rural white people are evil scum, which, of course, it does not. And they go on to say, more importantly, our critics refuse to seriously grapple with rural whites' place in Trump's movement as it grows increasingly authoritarian. I just want to encourage you to read this piece. It goes on from there, and I'm not going to quote more of it to you, but it's over at newrepublic.com, and it's titled, An Honest Assessment of Rural White Resentment is Long Overdue. And spot on. I completely agree. And the second story I wanted to share with you, and then I'll pick up your calls, is just an absolutely fascinating one. Here in the United States, increasingly because of Russian trolls running propaganda campaigns on TikTok, Facebook, Twitter, and other social media sites, but those are the principal three. More and more, increasingly, you've got young people who are kind of following the Marjorie Taylor Greene argument that we should just abandon Ukraine. You know, we've got enough on our plate. You know, we've got enough problems here at home. Why are we helping another country? Screw them. Let Putin have them. He's already kidnapped 100,000 children and sold them into sex slavery in Russia. Let him kidnap, you know, 1 million Ukrainian children. What's the big deal? It's just Ukrainian children after all. You know, he's already murdered a couple 100,000 Ukrainians. Let him murder 1 million of them. So, you know, what's the big deal? They're just Ukrainians. I mean, this is Marjorie Taylor Greene's and up until now Mike Johnson's and certainly, you know, Paul Gosar and all these other asses, these idiots, you know, in the so-called Freedom Caucus, the Cokehead Caucus, the far right, the nut jobs. So here in the United States, our young people are getting more and more skeptical about aid to Ukraine because that Russian propaganda is taking hold and because it has been embraced by Donald Trump and by his followers in the Republican Party. Not so in France. In France, Emmanuel Macron, the president of France, has been making sure that French people know exactly what's going on in Ukraine. Because the French had this experience in 1940, I think it was, maybe 39. I'm not sure when Germany invaded France. I believe it was 1940. Of having, you know, a fascist country just roll in and take over, and having a significant portion of their population, the so-called Vichy French, go along with it. I mean, the Germans didn't just come in and take over France. They set up a puppet government in France of French people. And that, you know, French government was every bit as fascist as you know, any other. I mean, watch this movie on HBO, The Plot to Overthrow America. It's just incredible. So anyhow, here's this story. This is from a Ukrainian newspaper, actually. Over half of young French citizens would fight in Ukraine to defend France, according to a poll cited by Le Parisien, a French newspaper, on April 12th. The Institute for Strategic Studies of the Military School and the General Directorate for International Relations and Strategy surveyed 2,300 young people aged 18 to 25 last summer. They asked the question, if the protection of France required the country to engage in the war in Ukraine, would you be ready to defend your country? Of the respondents, 51% said yes, including 17% absolutely agreeing and 34% answering yes, maybe yes. Young French citizens also favor deploying French troops to Ukraine more than the older generation. In the survey, 31% of youth thought positively about deploying French troops on the side of Ukraine, while only 17% of those over 50 agreed. 1 in 2 young people between 18 and 25 says they are ready to commit to France in Ukraine. It's pretty remarkable. So what's going on is that the young people in Ukraine, well, I would say, you know, more or less right across the board, the people, in France, the people of France understand that if Putin takes Ukraine, he's coming after Poland next. And if he takes Poland, then it's going to be, or Moldova next, or both. And after he takes Moldova and Transnistria and Poland, I mean, he's already got Transnistria. After he takes those, he's going to go for Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia, the Baltic states. And then he's going to come for France. I mean, they've seen this movie before. Now, here in the United States, we've never been invaded by fascists. I mean, the closest we got to that was Pearl Harbor being bombed by the fascist Japanese. So there's this, like, kind of general amnesia here in the United States. But in France, not so much. I find this absolutely fascinating. I haven't seen studies out of any other European countries, but it wouldn't surprise me if they're not that different. All righty, what's on your mind? I'll pick up your calls on the other side of this break. Stay with us.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
There's a break in the jury selection, by the way. Basically, no news coming out of the courthouse this morning. But I will keep you up to date as we go on, blow by blow. And welcome back. Picking up your calls here. Tyrone in Harlem. Hey, Tyrone, what's on your mind today?
Hey, how you doing, Tom? Good to hear from you. Good to listen to you.
Thank you.
You got a wealth of knowledge coming out of your station. I was to answer your call taker. Do you think that our country will ever have the guts to stand up against these men that have this dictatorship mentality? And because our country was put together by these same type of men, the ones that put wealthy white men that put the system together to work to their benefit. And because we had so many bites at the apple to hold these men responsible and refuse to do it, I don't know if we ever have the guts to actually hold these people to account of the lawlessness of your see with Nathan Reagan, all these people that just blatantly disregard our Constitution and our laws, and we turn a blind eye to this thing.
Yeah.
I don't know if we ever have the guts to really hold them responsible.
We did that once before. It was called the Civil War.
No, my goodness. Yeah, we see what how many people had to die for that.
That's
we
right.
have to do that again.
Over 600,000.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I don't know if we have to go down that road of a armed conflict between, because it seemed like that. I mean, they attacked the Capitol, and had we did what we were supposed to do when they attacked the Capitol, who knows where that would have ended up, because he wasn't trying to stop, and they weren't trying to stop, but it's just that we have this affinity to white male, that type of you can do what you want to do. We're not going to hold you responsible as if you are an average citizen. You're a real citizen, and we didn't push back on them the way that we would have if it was any other group of people. So understanding that, we know that this system is set up to make sure that we don't be too harsh on a certain group of people in this country. And if we're going to continue to fold and back off and not hold them responsible, we're going to continue to get walked all over. And the Democratic Party is going to continue to be the maids for the Republican Party, because we clean up, they come in and mess up, clean up, and we're going to continue in that mindset. We're going to always be victims to these people that have a disregard for our country, the laws, and the Constitution.
Yeah.
So I don't see. I'm trying to see where we're going to say, well, we can do it nicely. We're trying to do it nicely, and they're not trying to do it nicely. They have this Bogart bully type mentality, and we continue to try to accommodate. Okay, well we'll let you have this. You want a war? Okay, we'll build some of the war, but can we have? No, you can't have anything. You're trying to compromise.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. I hope it's not a violent situation, but I don't see us getting past it.
I hope so too. And the good news is that none of our states are so monolithic that they could repeat what happened in 1861. I'm not real worried about that, Tyrone. What worries me is a Trump presidency that would turn the whole country to the right. Tyrone, I got to run. Thanks for the call. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. From Los Angeles to Columbia, South Carolina, from Birmingham, Alabama to Baltimore, universal basic income programs are chalking up proof after proof of their viability. Basically just giving people, low-income people, poor people, somewhere between $500 and $1,500 a month, no strings attached, is lifting people out of poverty, getting them back on track, getting them into solid middle-class jobs, helping their children tremendously. This works. Now, we don't have to do UBI in the United States. We're the only developed country in the world that doesn't have a national health care program. Health expenses are whacking a lot of low-income people. We're the only developed country in the world that doesn't have free college education. Education expenses are whacking people. There's a lot we could do. We can subsidize housing. We can subsidize food. We do that with food stamps. We could expand it. There's a lot we could do to benefit from this. There's a whole report about that over at hartmannreport.com. Check it out. Welcome back, 24 minutes past the hour, picking up your calls here. Susha in Venice, California. Hey, Susha, what's up?
Hey, Tom. It's kind of, I saw this breaking article yesterday, and it's from the Occupy Democrats. It says that Mike Johnson has caved to the demands of President Biden. The House will vote and pass aid to Ukraine, Taiwan, and Israel. The world will become a safer place because of President Biden's leadership. So that was, it made it sound like it was already a complete, you know.
Yeah,
so,
I'm not holding my breath. You know, it looks like that's what he's going to do, but and he was pushing back this morning on Marjorie Taylor Greene, you know, which is a good thing. And I think that's because the Democrats have told him if he does this, they'll back him.
Right. Okay. Also, another thing, given the high stakes of Donald's trial, and by the way, his niece Mary has mentioned that he hates being called Donald. He identified so strongly with the changed and chosen name of Trump. And we all know when we hear the name Donald, who's being talked about, why don't we join Mary and Michael Cohen and just refer to him as Donald?
Anyway, you mean, wait a second. He doesn't like being called Donald? What does he want to be called?
Right.
Mr. Trump?
Trump. He just wants to hear Trump.
Huh. Interesting.
So, you know because that's such... You know, that's the brand, right? So, I mean, let's just demote him, okay?
Why not call him Donnie?
Okay.
I know there's a movement among Democrats to call RFK Jr. Bob, you know, because Bobby was his dad. Sorry, you know, and RFK was his dad, so let's call him Bob. You know, maybe there should be a movement among Democrats to call Donald Donnie or Don or the Don. You know, which kind of suggests that he's a mob boss.
The Don, right. Well, right. I mean, I think you'd have to explain if you say Donnie, everyone would know who Donald is. But anyway, because of the very real possibility that one of his supporters will lie their way onto the jury, I'm wondering, can't the prosecution demand the implementation of a lie detector in the jury selection process?
They cannot, no. But what they can do, and what I'm guessing they probably will do, is make it very clear to all the jurors that there can be criminal penalties for trying to flip a court hearing, you know, a trial. And
but once he's been acquitted, you know, it's like there's nothing to be done at that point.
Well, there's nothing to be done about Trump. But what can, other than bringing different charges against him, but what can be done is they can prosecute the juror. And so they've got to put the fear of God into these jurors. And I'm not sure exactly how they do that. It'd be good to talk to a lawyer about it. Sushi, I got to run. Thank you.
Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Back with more of your calls on the other side of this break. Stay with us.
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Ezra Klein's new book, Why We're Polarized. This is from the introduction, and it's a couple pages into it. I'm starting out here. I have found that American politics is best understood by braiding two forms of knowledge that are often left separate: the direct, on-the-ground insights shared by politicians, activists, government officials, and other subjects of my reporting, and the more systemic analyses conducted by political scientists, sociologists, historians, and others with the time, methods, and expertise to study American politics at scale. On their own, political actors often ignore the incentives shaping their decisions, and academic researchers miss the human motivations that drive political decision-making. Together, however, they shine bright light on how and why American politics works the way it does. There's much awry in American politics, and I won't in this book attempt to catalog all of it. But I've come to believe the master story, the one that drives almost all divides and most fundamentally shapes the behavior of participants, is the logic of polarization. That logic, put simply, is this. To appeal to a more polarized public, political institutions and political actors behave in more polarized ways. As political institutions and actors become more polarized, they further polarize the public. This sets off a feedback cycle. To appeal to a yet more polarized public, institutions must polarize further. When faced with yet more polarized institutions, the public polarizes further, and so on. Understanding that we exist in relationship with our political institutions, that they are changed by us and we are changed by them, is the key to this story. We don't just use politics for our own ends. Politics uses us for its own ends. There are many different types of polarization possible, and I'll discuss some of them later in the book, but the locus of polarization I'll discuss is on political identity. And that requires saying a few words about a term that should be very useful in American politics, but that has become almost useless: identity politics. A core argument of this book is that everyone engaged in American politics is engaged in identity politics. This is not an insult, and it's not controversial. We form and fold identities constantly, naturally. Identity is present in politics in the way gravity, evolution, or cognition is present in politics. That is to say, it is omnipresent in politics because it is omnipresent in us. There is no way to read the literature on how humans form and protect their personal and group identities, literature I will survey in this book, and believe that any of us is immune. It runs so deep in our psyches, so activated so easily by even weak cues and distant threats, that it is impossible to speak seriously about how we engage with one another without discussing how our identities shape that engagement. Unfortunately, the term identity politics has been weaponized. It is most often used by speakers to describe politics as practiced by members of historically marginalized groups. If you're black and you're worried about police brutality, that's identity politics. If you're a woman and you're worried about the male-female pay gap, that's identity politics. But if you're a rural gun owner decrying universal background checks as tyranny, or a billionaire CEO complaining that high tax rates demonize success, or a Christian insisting on nativity scenes in public squares, well, that's just good old-fashioned politics. With a quick sleight of hand, identity becomes something that only marginalized groups have. The term identity politics in this usage obscures rather than illuminates. It's used to diminish and discredit the concerns of weaker groups by making them look self-interested, special pleading in order to clear the agenda for the concerns of stronger groups, which are framed as more rational, proper topics for normal political debate. But in wielding identity as a blade, we have lost it as a lens, blinding ourselves in a bid for political advantage. We're left searching in vain for what we refuse to allow ourselves to see. All politics is influenced by identity. Those identities are most powerful when they are so pervasive as to be either invisible or uncontroversial. American is an identity. So too is Christian. When politicians, including the irreligious, end speeches with "God bless America," it's not because they're making an appeal to a higher power, but because they're making an appeal to our bedrock identities. If you don't believe me, ask yourself why there are so few open atheists or even agnostics in national politics. This does not mean that politics is an equation solved by locating identity. Identity shapes our worldview, but it does not mechanistically decide it. And while we often speak of identity as a singular, it is always a dizzying plural. We have countless identities, some of them in active conflict with each other, others lying dormant until activated by threat or fortune. Much that happens in political campaigns is best understood as a struggle over which identities voters will inhabit come election day. Will they feel like workers exploited by their bosses, or heartlanders dismissed by coastal elites? Will they vote as patriotic traditionalists offended by NFL players who kneel during the national anthem, or as parents worried about the climate their children will inhabit? What we are often fighting over in American politics is group identity and status. Fights that express themselves in debates over policy and power, but cannot be truly reconciled by either. Health policy is positive sum, but identity conflict is zero sum. The book, Why We're Polarized, by Ezra Klein.
Hey, if you like the rants that I open the show with every day, they're typically published over at hartmannreport.com. Check it out. Back in 2010, when Viktor Orban took over the Fidesz party in Hungary, that party was sort of like the Republican Party. It was just a conventional conservative European political party. And he has turned it into a neo-fascist powerhouse. He pushed through he altered the nation's constitution to push through what we would call gerrymandering and voter suppression so that his party will always win. He campaigned on building a wall. Build a wall was literally one of his campaign slogans, and he did build a wall across the southern border of Hungary to keep out Syrian refugees who were fleeing the violence when Russia was bombing that country. His other two campaign slogans were, and I quote, "Restore Christian purity and make Hungary great again." Seriously, back in 2010, 6 years before Trump. There's an amazing backstory about how Viktor Orban is being cloned, essentially, in the GOP. You can find the article over at hartmannreport.com. Check it out. 35 minutes past the hour, picking up your calls. Bob in Skokie, Illinois. Hey, Bob, what's up?
Hi, Tom. I just wanted to respond to what you said before about Tom Cotton, who I agree with you is completely, over the edge. But yesterday here in Chicago and around the rest of the country and even the world, there were Palestinian protests. And in Chicago, they blocked for several hours the entrances to O'Hare Airport. And I had some friends who had to fly out yesterday who got caught in that mess.
Oh,
I called the Chicago Police Department because the pictures that I saw on Twitter about it showed two police cars about 50 feet behind the protesters who were blocking the entranceway. And I asked the police what in the world was going on, and they admitted that what was going on was illegal, and they couldn't understand why the police were just sitting there and doing nothing. And one of the police told one of my friends, if this is going on now, can you imagine what's going to happen with the Democratic National Convention?
Yeah.
If we don't get this.
Yeah.
So, I frankly spoke to my friends who weren't there yet, but on their way, and I said, if need be, I would organize 20 or 30 people to get out of their cars and physically remove these people themselves if the police are just going to stand there. Because, again, the police department told me that this was all illegal and that should not be even going on.
Yeah.
So, that's really all I wanted to say.
Bob, I get it. And getting out of your car and physically removing people is a whole different thing than throwing them off a bridge or ripping the skin off their hands.
Agree. Cotton's nuts, but we all know that.
Yeah. But, I get it. On the one hand, I'm a fan of nonviolent protest and even of disruptive nonviolent protest. On the other hand, when people are the recipients of that, the victims of protest, they have a right also. They have a right to push back. I would think that a more targeted protest, one that disrupts government rather than people trying to get to the airport, would probably make more friends.
Obviously, they blocked bridges and highways, all around the country earlier.
Yeah.
They've
been doing it all over the country today, or yesterday, rather. Yeah.
Can I just bring up one other thing real quickly?
Sure.
It's not on this subject, but I think it's really important. I saw a release last week from a group called Foundation for Defense of Democracy, which I looked up, and it's a right-wing,
it's a neoliberal
website.
Yeah.
Such. But I looked into the information they printed, and what they printed was apparently that the ministry in Gaza, the health ministry, had admitted that there were about 11,700 people that they claim have died, who they have no IDs for, no names for. They can't even corroborate that these people, have been deceased. And if you look at those numbers and such, I'm not going to condone, 8,000 people having been killed in Gaza, because that's what the numbers come down to. If you remove those 11,700 people and you look at the 13,000...
I think 11,000 from 32,000 is not 8,000.
No, it's not. But if you look at the 13,000 Hamas militants that Israel claims to have gotten rid of, that does take it down to something under 9,000 people.
I'm pretty skeptical. When you devastate cities with 2,000-pound dumb bombs, a hell of a lot of people are going to be blown right out of their clothes, much less not carrying their passports.
Okay, I just wanted to bring that up, and thanks for letting me do that. Tom, have a great day.
You're welcome. Thank you, Bob. Marie in New York City. Hey, Marie, what's on your mind today?
Hi there. Boo-hoo. I had friends out yesterday demonstrating, not protesting, and going across the Brooklyn Bridge. So, little inconvenience. You get there a minute late, but at least you get there.
Yeah.
But
well, a minute is different than 2 hours. But, yeah, I get what you're saying.
Okay. I called to talk about Project 2025 and Topic 47, which is something that goes along with it. Mm-hmm. You know that they're not just going to forget about these things, these papers, just because Trump does not get into office. The very next fascistic person that comes up, they're going to try to implement those things.
You're right.
What's going to be happening then? People need to think a little bit ahead.
Yep.
The other thing I wanted to just touch on was cameras in the courtroom. They put cameras everywhere, down your throat, up your bum, out in space, on every corner. There ought to be, if not for a broadcast, at least for posterity. Because this is and I'll say the word unprecedented situation where there's a former president being tried.
I agree. I was frankly surprised.
The Library of Congress and the Smithsonian. Those are the two institutions that really need to have cameras there just to record it. And the third thing I'll just talk about for a minute
if I may speak to your second things first.
Antifada that they're talking about in the courtroom with Mr. Trump, with Donald. Antifada, anybody that had a relative that fought in World War II are descendants of Antifada people since they were fighting fascism.
Yep.
So those are the three things that I want to say. Oh, yes, and Mr. Bush. Where is Mr. Bush?
Right. Yeah, well, he's a war criminal in hiding, and he knows it.
And he hasn't spoken up for democracy yet.
No,
He's been mighty quiet on the subject.
Yeah, sadly. Marie, thank you for the call. Seth in Los Angeles. Hey, Seth, what's up?
Hello, Tom. How are you?
I'm well. What's up?
Well, I wanted to alleviate some people's fears about the jury getting hung by a MAGA person getting on, which is entirely possible.
You had a Fox News host yesterday tweeting out specific instructions, and he's a lawyer, specific instructions on how to hang the jury.
Yes, I'm aware of all that. However, there are some safeguards that I think should be considered. Yeah. The first, and you brought up the big one, which is, someone going to go to jail. But before you even get there, first of all, I've been on several voir dires and a couple of juries. It's a lot harder to lie about who you are than people think it is. And it's not that they're going to walk in a MAGA hat, but there are all sorts of questions about your life you're not prepared to lie about that it's just stalling in how you answer things. It's the reverence when you're in front of the orange Jesus himself. It's not that easy. But let's say they do get on. All right? Someone manages to pull the wool and gets there. We should also remember, for a lot of people on that jury, this will be the first time in their lives that these facts are presented to them. some of them have been so shielded from hearing any of this, it will come as a genuine surprise to them. And I have found in the juries I've served, more often than not, most people want to do their job as finders of fact in that room. At the end of the day.
And that's what happened with the E. Jean Carroll jury. And in both the first and second juries, there were people who afterwards came out and said, yes, I voted for Donald Trump. I'm a Donald Trump fan, but it's very clear he raped E. Jean Carroll. You know, he's liable for this crime.
Yes, and you've got to believe that on several of these grand juries, there were at least a few MAGA members who voted because they finally heard the facts for the first time. I'm not as scared of that one holdout who's going to ignore the facts, even when the other 11 say, if you do this, we're going to let the judge know. I'm not as scared of that person as everyone else is.
Yeah. Well, that makes a lot of sense. I'm assuming you're not an attorney, Seth. You've just been on juries a few times?
I'm not an attorney. I'm just a guy who's been on juries. I've been a foreman. I've been in voir dire. I don't know how I'm this unlucky because I lie to get out of it, and it never works.
I get it. I get it. I would love to hear from an attorney who is, who is in the New York Bar, who's been licensed or approved or whatever the word is for lawyers in with bars, who's familiar with New York rules of juries and what the specific so maybe one of our listeners who's a New York attorney can call in and share that information with us, because
I would love that.
Yeah, because and if not, if I don't hear from anybody today, I'll make it a point of looking it up this afternoon so I can share it with you all tomorrow. I just don't know off the top of my head. Or maybe on Thursday, Dean Ovidala is going to be on our program day after tomorrow. He is a New York lawyer. So, maybe he can illuminate us all. Seth, thanks a lot for the call. Spot on. 45 minutes past the hour. We'll be ready.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
So Netanyahu just issued a statement that he is definitely going to retaliate against Iran. Oh, boy. Welcome back. John in Seattle. Hey, John, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, good morning, Tom. Thanks for taking my call. I'm calling in regards to the lady that called in about jury duty and the person you were just talking with. I noticed that it's a 5-year sentence for perjury, and that's what they're committing if they lie. But I'm not sure that I think they need to fill out a form that states something about it's a crime to lie, and that's the release form, I believe, that they have to fill out. I'm not sure. I've never been on jury duty before.
Yeah, and you're not an attorney, right?
No, and it's a good question because I know there's a fine. The judge can fine them or also sentence.
Well, it varies.
To 5 years.
It's going to depend on state law. He's being prosecuted under New York state law, so so that that's a variable, and I don't know what the fines are. I also don't know if the potential jurors are sworn under oath. If they are, then yeah, you're right, it would be perjury, and there are fairly draconian penalties for perjury.
Right, it's perjury, and also with the jury, I was thinking, wouldn't it be good to have see-through glass so that
you mean one-way glass?
Attorneys can't. Go ahead.
One-way glass, you mean?
A one-way glass for the juries to so they can see the court, but the court can't see in.
Yeah, that's not going to happen in this case.
No, I know, but I thought maybe the judge could have a camera open on the jury and he can see what's going on.
I like the earlier suggestion that the National Archives or the some official governmental historical, the New York State Historical Association. I don't think that's actually, well, if that is a government agency, should have the right to have a camera in the court. I was astonished, or I am astonished, frankly. I mean, we've known for over a year that this case was coming, or for about a year, certainly.
Right.
I was astonished that the New York State legislature didn't pass legislation changing the rule on cameras, and at the very least putting it up to the discretion of the judge, because this is history. I mean, this is right up there with the Lindbergh baby and the
O.J. Simpson.
Yeah, the Rosenberg trial. No, I mean, O.J. Simpson was just, a guy who was accused of killing his wife.
But it was every day.
This has to do with
TV.
Right, but I get that, but this has to do with the fate and future of American democracy. The consequences of this trial are massive, and the historical precedent is massive. I mean, he's our second clearly criminal president. I mean, Richard Nixon had to be pardoned to avoid going through what Trump is going through right now. But
it would definitely make up people's minds.
Well, it should be part of the historical record. I mean, we're in the age of technology. Videotaping things is not a big deal. It could be done in a way that's not intrusive. I would like my grandchildren to be able to see this trial. And right now they're 2 and 5, and they have no friggin' clue what's going on. But they should have the right to see it. John, I got to run, but thank you for the call. It's 10 minutes before the hour. I'll be right back with you in 60 seconds. Stay with us. Hey, thanks so much for sharing our program and for reaching out to our stations and sponsors and letting them know that you're listening. It really means a lot to us. So a lot of people are wondering, why is it in America that we can't have nice things? Why don't we have, the same things every other democracy has? Every other democracy in the world has a national health care system of some form, and everybody is covered. We don't. We've got 27 million uninsured people and over 100 million underinsured people. Why is that? Why is it that every other country in the world offers college education very inexpensively, if not for free, and for here you go to debt? Why is it that we've got our public schools crumbling and other countries are doing well? Why is it that we've got Medicare being taken apart by this Medicare Advantage scam and nobody will do anything about it? Well, it turns out the reason why it boils down to one thing, one Supreme Court decision, Citizens United, legalizing the bribery of our politicians. There's a whole rant about this over at HartmannReport.com. I think you're going to find it very, very useful. Check it out. "51 minutes past the hour, picking up your calls here. Alfredo in Mountain View, California. Hey, Alfredo, what's up?
Hey, Tom, how are you?
Good. What's on your mind?
Thank you and your crew for the great job you guys are doing. I wanted to talk about gouging. As you very accurately predicted, here in California, gasoline prices are approaching $6 a gallon where I live. Groceries are unbelievably expensive. Corporations have figured out when they give wage increases to their workers, they're passing the cost to the consumers. Corporations have figured out you have brokerage firms buying homes. It's almost impossible to purchase a home now because it's so expensive. The purchasing power of consumers here is going down. It's not going up, despite of the wage increases. So it's just very frustrating. And a windfall tax on corporations will not help consumers. So it's very frustrating. And so I just wanted to express that to you, and I would like to hear what you have to say about that. And I will take my answer off the air. Sure. And thank you so much for everything, Tom.
Yeah, what we're seeing, Alfredo, is the result of monopoly power by these companies. Back in 1963 or 65, the U.S. Supreme Court heard a case where McKinney Shoe and Buster Brown Shoe companies wanted to merge, and the merged company would have owned 5% or controlled 5% of the U.S. shoe market. And the Supreme Court shot that down, saying that under the law, under the way that the Sherman and Clayton and other antitrust acts had been enforced over the years, 5% was too much market power for any one company. Ronald Reagan in 1983 had his directed his heads of the Federal Trade Commission, the Securities and Exchange Commission, and the Department of Justice to essentially stop enforcing the antitrust laws. And as a result, there was this huge explosion of economic activity. They called it the mergers and acquisition mania, or the M&A mania. And these guys who called themselves M&A artists, or sometimes they call themselves masters of the universe. These guys, just merged together, just jammed together all these companies. You take a dozen smaller companies that are in the, say, gasoline business, running gas stations and things like that, refineries, oil rigs, or shoe companies or whatever. I mean, just now Nike controls 19% of the shoe market. I mean, it's just one company. And you jam them together, and they get to lay off all but one of their bookkeeping departments. They get to lay off all but one of their sales departments. They get to lay off all but one of their, fill in the blanks, right? And the result of that is that a lot of jobs are lost as a result of these mergers. The merged companies end up with massive market power. And there is now, as a result of over 40 years of Reagan's policies being in place, and the Biden administration is literally the first administration since 1983 to try to enforce the antitrust laws. They're going after Google right now, you'll recall. But what's happened is that there is not a single sector in the American economy. Big box retailers, restaurants, hotels, gasoline stations, I mean, you name it, pharmaceuticals, hospital chains. There's not a single sector in American business where 5 or fewer companies don't control 80 or more % of the entire marketplace. And what that does is it gives them absolute immunity from price competition pressure. They no longer have to lower prices or keep prices low because the competition would come in and eat their lunch. Instead, they just raise prices to what they consider to be the pain threshold, to the point where people stop buying. So the marketplace is not defining prices by competition, which is how, Adam Smith saw it in Wealth of Nations in 1776. It's not how traditionally price pressures were brought to bear. Prices are controlled and held steady. Instead, the only thing that is stopping the increase in prices is consumers being unwilling to pay them. And in the case of things like gasoline and medicine and food, you got no friggin' choice. You got to eat, you got to take your medicine, and you got to fill your car if you want to get to work. And these companies know this. And so they're just gleefully, robbing us blind and then taking those trillions. I mean, American business made over $3 trillion in profits last year. It was the most profitable year for American corporations in the history of the country. And the solution to this is not wage and price controls. The solution to this is to break up these monopolies. Break up the big airlines, break up the big telco companies, break up the big media, break up big pharma, break up big oil, you name it, break them up so that we restore competition to the marketplace. It's going to take time. It's going to take years, but it's got to be done.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the hartmannreport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com.
We say fight back!
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is The Storm is Here, An American Crucible by Luke Mogelson. This is from the introduction. Hoping to stave off an encroaching despair on the morning of January 7th, 2021, I left my hotel in Washington, D.C. and took a taxi to the Lincoln Memorial. I was looking for sanctuary, and an open-air chamber designed to resemble a temple seemed as likely a place to find it as any. I'd been there once or twice before, passing between the marble columns. You weren't humbled into silence as much as welcomed by it. When I arrived this time, however, the monument was closed. Squad cars were pulling up, officers expelling a braying crowd, a mob, excuse me. Many of the people wore red MAGA hats and Trump 2020 shirts. I asked someone what had happened. It seemed that a woman had been posing for pictures with a Gadsden flag, "Don't tread on me," below a hissing snake on a yellow field, when an officer advised that such displays were not allowed. A fracas had ensued, and now the Trump supporters converged at the bottom of the steps, the same steps from which, in 1963, Martin Luther King delivered his "I Have a Dream" speech, and the crowd then began calling the officers Nazis, Marxists, and pigs. Young men in blazers waved their middle fingers. "Christ is king," they chanted. "Aren't we the pussies?" a little bald man asked. "Honestly, we're not overrunning them?" "That's when they start executing people," said a woman in her 30s, glaring hatefully at the police. It occurred to me that some of the officers impassively absorbing this abuse probably had friends in the hospital. Less than 24 hours earlier, I had watched Donald Trump tell a similar, though much larger mob assembled on the far end of the reflecting pool that extended behind us, quote, "If you don't fight like hell, you're not going to have a country anymore," end quote. Thousands of people, many armed with bats, clubs, whips, and other rudimentary weapons, had proceeded to march up the National Mall. At the Capitol, they had wounded around 180 law enforcement agents, smashed through doors and windows, and frantically hunted for politicians determined to sabotage the peaceful transition of power. Some carried nooses, barked racial epithets, assaulted journalists, and called for the vice president to be lynched. On the Senate floor, I watched Trump supporters ransack desks and steal confidential documents. A bare-chested man in a horned headdress wielding a spear pronounced Mike Pence an effing traitor. Then he led the rioters in prayer. An officer who suffered a stroke after being maced would later die. Now it was not the police, but the Trump supporters who were outraged. Once again, they believed they'd been wronged. Once again, their sense of injury was blistering. The woman with the Gadsden flag was a pastor from Los Angeles. "I know that had to be Antifa," she said of the attack on the Capitol. "I know it did, because everyone here," she gestured at the livid crowd berating the police, "there's such a spirit of community." She began to weep. "How dare they?" she demanded of the officers. "What is wrong with this country? This is not my America. I don't understand." That made two of us. I could think of only one question to ask. Where do we go from here? The pastor wiped her tears. Her suffering was vast. "I will tell you this," she sobbed. "I will not turn the other cheek to what's not right. This is not right. This is not right." The first epidemic I reported on was in West Africa in 2014. Although Ebola was far more deadly and contagious than COVID-19, the international response is inadequate. Liberia's largest slum, a dense, warm of crude squatter dwellings in a narrow peninsula that jutted into the Atlantic from downtown Monrovia was a formidable early hot zone. Below a canopy of rusty sheet metal, some 80,000 denizens lacked running water, relieved themselves in the cramped gaps between walls, and repurposed detritus as a bulwark against eroding riverbanks. As the virus wiped out whole families, the Liberian military sealed off the encampments with ramparts and barbed wire. Gunships patrolled the coast. Crime spiked. Panic spread. Soldiers fired on people trying to escape. The community looked doomed. After 10 days, emissaries from the slum prevailed on the government to end the blockade. In exchange, they agreed to implement a suite of precautions, identifying and isolating sick people in their homes, tracking down their recent contacts, and vigilantly monitoring each individual for a period of 3 weeks, the maximum amount of time that the virus was known to incubate before manifesting symptoms. Normally, all this should have been the responsibility of medical professionals and epidemiologists. In the slum, though, the job fell to locals. Against most expectations, within a month, the Ebola outbreak had been contained. Monrovia was not an aberration. In the absence of rescue by the world and their own governments, which were among the poorest on the earth, West Africans proved remarkably adept at helping one another to survive. Neighborhoods mobilized, healthcare workers volunteered, secluded villages formed ad hoc task forces to oversee sanitation, quarantines, and mandatory social distancing. Education was crucial. Initially, conspiracy theories abounded. Some West Africans embraced a rumor that the virus was a ploy to solicit foreign donor money. Spiritual healers proffered metaphysical explanations for the vagaries of death and illness. In one remote hamlet I visited in Sierra Leone, the chief had been told that somewhere a commercial plane had crashed. For every passenger who died, a villager must as well. The book, The Storm is Here, by Luke Mogelson.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome to Hour 3 of the Thom Hartmann Program. On the line with us is our buddy Sabrina Haake, the federal trial attorney, 20-plus years of experience, specializing in First and 14th Amendment defense, contributor to numerous law journals and publications, including the Chicago Tribune, but most importantly, the author of The Haake Take over on Substack. You can find it at Sabrina Haake, Haake, .substack.com, or just type in Haake, Haake, take over on Substack, and it'll pop right up. You can find it. It's also on Twitter. It's Haake_Sabrina. Sabrina, welcome back to the program. I love this article that you published in your Haake Take newsletter, titled "Is the Arc of Justice Finally Bending Against Big Oil?" Tell us about this. Yours was titled "Climate Justice Has Begun." And it starts out with the European Council of Human Rights. Give us the story.
Right. So last week, it's a monumental ruling that hasn't gotten much attention from mainstream media, surprisingly, but it is a 250-page ruling, and it's complicated and dense. The European Court of Human Rights has issued a ruling for the first time in history that failure to address climate change is a violation of human rights. It's a big deal. It's kind of a no-brainer. It makes common sense that if you have the right to life, as we do under the ability to pursue life and the pursuit of happiness, that having a livable planet with drinkable water and breathable air would be part of that. But it's more complicated than that. But before I get to what's happening in the United States and the complications here, I just want to applaud the Swiss government's response and the plaintiffs in Switzerland who brought this case. Most cases on climate are brought, of course, by young people, freaked out about what's happening with the planet. You can't blame them. I'm freaked out about it too, as most of us are. But in this case, the plaintiffs were elderly women in their 70s, and the court agreed with them that they had a right to pursue this claim because they have the right to live without undue influence from a poisonous environment. In that case, elderly people have their own particular responses to heat waves. The complication in the United States has been for years what's called the political question doctrine. Federal courts are not supposed to set policy. If there's an issue that the federal government through legislation can address, we of course expect our elected officials to do that. But in the United States, under Citizens United, as you know very well, Big Oil has the right to have outsized influence on who gets elected, and they make very sure that they support politicians who will not vote to restrict the use of fossil fuels. It leaves us in a bind because we have the courts who are reluctant to act and federal legislators who are basically owned by Big Oil, not willing to act because they're afraid that they will be defeated or primaried with money from Big Oil. The great news is that plaintiffs are taking a different tack now. Instead of going after the policy and climate change in general, they're going after Big Oil for deceptive practices. And man, is it a whopper. We have known for decades that Big Oil, including numerous companies, and I'll just name a few against whom present cases are pending, Chevron, ExxonMobil, Shell, American Petroleum Institute, and others, who have engaged in deceptive practices for decades. We have it in writing that their CEOs have known forever that there's a causal link between their products and what's happening with climate change, and it's particularly increasing the global temperature. But instead of owning that and trying to mitigate the damages and trying to come forward with a solution, they have been lying about it, hiring scientists who are clearly biased and pretending that they are not biased. They've sent forged letters to Congress. They've engaged in fake grassroots campaigns. It's all of a piece to stop federal legislators from enacting legislation that would effectively address climate change. And we know we are running out of time. There's no serious scientific debate about what's causing our temperature increase. The question is what you do about it. So now the cases that are pending, and over 24 cases are pending in several courts, have been brought by numerous state and local government, including Rhode Island, Baltimore, Boulder, Colorado, San Miguel counties, Honolulu, Maui, the state of California, Marin, San Mateo, and Santa Cruz counties, to name a few. And they're going after Big Oil for this deception that they have proved over decades. Cases are pending, but the Supreme Court, in a good piece of news, has said that if these are state cases alleging state violations for negligence, nuisance, and fraud and deceptive practices, they are not going to kick the cases to federal court. Big Oil, of course, is desperate to get these cases removed to federal court because they want the political question doctrine to prevail. And they also are making the argument that courts can't set policy. This is up to the federal government that they are paying not to do anything about climate. So it's a catch-22. Plaintiffs have figured out a way around it. The cases in Montana and Hawaii that I talk about in my Substack are very hopeful cases. They were brought by young people arguing that they have the right to a clean environment. And the Montana case is pretty close to the Switzerland ruling, where Montana in its constitution guarantees a livable environment. And the judge in that case agreed, granted the relief. And the people who are granting permits now for oil and gas drilling and other kinds of related activities now have to consider what they're doing to the environment through climate change. And the Montana Supreme Court refused to put a stay on that ruling while, of course, Big Oil is appealing it. So those are good indications. And in Hawaii, there's another case pending by young plaintiffs against the Department of Transportation, saying that what they're doing is encouraging the use of fossil fuels. They're not wrong. And there's also a case pending in Hawaii where the government is suing Big Oil. That case is up on appeal. The Big Oils have filed a petition with the Supreme Court, again, arguing that federal law preempts these state law claims. Of course, they want to get out of state law claims because they're pretty much unassailable if they've got it in writing that they've known all these decades. I mean, I've seen evidence going back to the 1940s that scientists were telling the oil industry that this is causing fluorocarbons to bond, and that emissions are going to eventually raise our temperature into unsustainable levels. They've known about it and they've lied about it. So I think that the jurisdiction tide is turning, and that these cases are going to start to proliferate. It'll be interesting to see what this version of the Supreme Court does with it. We know that there are several people on the bench who have ties to big oil. Alito is a big investor. Amy Coney Barrett's father was involved with the American Petroleum Institute for decades. She grew up with it. Clarence Thomas, we all know, is a bot justice. You know, it'll be tricky to see what they do with it. Right. But if every young person voted, that's the solution. Because if every young person voted, we could change the makeup and change the trajectory. And the day the election happens, we can start to transition to a clean energy. We have the money, we have the means, we just don't have the will to do it.
And we have the technology. To what extent is this an analogy or analogous to the tobacco settlements in the 90s?
Oh, exactly. The tobacco cases and the opioid cases, the same thing. Plaintiffs were able to show that there were deceptive practices, that the corporations knew that their products were killing people, and because they were so lucrative, they advertised them anyway. They promoted them anyway. So it wasn't just the use of the opioids or the tobacco, which would be hard to stop, but it was the fact that these corporations made trillions of dollars peddling these products, knowing that they were dangerous and lying about them. So it's a straight up consumer fraud, deceptive practices. And I think these state cases have real legs, and that big oil is they need to start looking over their shoulders and getting serious about what they're going to do about it.
That's great. We're going to hit a break in a second, but I had an unrelated question for you as an attorney. Do you know what the penalties would be and how they would be meted out to a juror who embeds themselves in the Trump jury with the specific intention of hanging the jury?
No, I don't know what the specific penalties would be. I'm guessing it's very much controlled by state law, and in this case, a New York law would govern it. It's a great question, and of course, it's something everybody has to wonder about, because if you feel very strongly and Trump is your Lord and Savior, you'll do whatever you can, including perjure yourself. So, you know, there'd be penalties for perjury, all kinds of implications for the individual who does that. But in terms of our national justice and our national politics, it would be disastrous.
There you go. There you go. Sabrina Haake, check it out over at Substack.com. Hake's Take, Haake. Sabrina, thanks so much for dropping by.
Thanks so much. Always free. Thank you.
There you go. Good talking to you.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
15 minutes past the hour. I'll be back with more of the news of the day and your calls in just a moment. Welcome back. Susan in Caldwell, Idaho. Hey, Susan, what's on your mind today?
I just wanted to go back to your opening about the white rural rage reaction and how that fits in to our current politics. You know, we're kind of ground zero or a microcosm of that question here in Idaho. And I'd like to speak to a book that, I don't know if you've read it or heard of it, Stephen Kahn's The Lies of the Land, out of the University of Chicago Press. Came out late last year. I listened to him talk on C-SPAN, read the review in the New Yorkers last year. His point, his theme is, we are all, in our country, and I agree with this, the product of state and industrial capitalism. We live where we live based on where they let us work. And it gets kind of blurry in the rural landscape because there's so few people spread out of basically 96% of the U.S. landmass. And I think a lot of the rural rage that you hear about is that what is really has to be looked at as class exploitation keeps getting obscured by identity politics descriptions in all of our media, even the left-leaning media. And I think it would be more productive if people would just think about how 96% of this country is dominated by federal landowning, state landowning, extractive landowning, that is timber and mining, and also military operations in our country. And this is where about 50 million people have to try and live at this point. They're there because of previous activities of all those four groupings, if you know what I'm saying. And I can tell you a historical example here in Idaho of how opinions can be manipulated. Idaho at one point was ground zero for labor organization. We had our mines and we had our lumber industry before World War I. And at different times, our governors would bring in federal troops, request federal troops. And you know who would be sent in to our northern counties to make sure nobody could get sympathetic with our federal troops trying to maintain order? They would send in the black regiments, what we know today as the Buffalo Soldiers. They did that. That was a purposeful move. Or actually, it was purposely requested by the Idaho governor, because this is a state that still has a population of black people that's about 1%. And it just goes on and on like that.
So why would he invite a black regiment into Idaho, just to stir up hatred among the Idaho rural people?
The people, well, we were settled basically after the Civil War with the mining industry. And a lot of our intake was from the former Confederate states, maybe a little penchant for that point of view. Also, there would be no fraternization between the people who were being watched by the federal troops and the federal troops for that reason. They just don't want to associate with each other. It's a perfect way to divide people. And we continue this now with our identity politics point of view. You can do this in the urban areas where there are enough people get to know each other and can organize. Out here where it's so spread out, it just doesn't work.
Yeah, remarkable. Susan, thank you. That's very insightful. I appreciate that. I often learn from you. I appreciate the call. 20 minutes past the hour. I'll be back with you in 60 seconds. Stay tuned. Change starts with you. You can be calling your Democratic or Republican representatives to let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capitol switchboard. It'll get you right through to them. Recently, I did an op-ed and a little rant here about what happens when you raise the top income tax rate on morbidly rich people to 90%. How, that helps reduce income inequality and funds the government, all kinds of good positive things. What about corporate taxes? We really need to go back to the 50% top corporate income tax rate that we had under Dwight Eisenhower, for example. The reason why is not on the assumption that we're going to collect all that money, but what it does is it causes corporations to change their behavior, to do things to try to get tax deductions so they don't have to pay that in taxes. And what are the main things they do? They develop new products. They do research and development. They become more competitive. They open up new stores. They pay their employees better. They offer better benefits. All of these things are 100% tax deductible and thus lower their corporate income taxes and help out America. You can read all about it over at hartmannreport.com. Welcome back. 21 minutes past the hour, and over at hunterandfarmersworld.com, my site about attention deficit disorder, I published a piece yesterday morning titled ADHD, Good German Schools Come to America. And it's about the history of our public school system and how different it is from many other countries' public schools, A, and B, how we can fix it to make it more accommodating to everybody, which would include ADHD students as well as the farmer students, the normal students. And basically it would be, increasing the level of stimulation. Louise and I, back in the 90s when I was traveling around the world speaking on ADHD, we visited Taiwan and spent the day in a public school there. And it was just amazing. The teacher got up, and now this was all done in I assume Mandarin, in Chinese, and I didn't understand what was being said, but I could tell what was going on. She got up, in front of a class of about 30, 35 students, and on the blackboard she laid out this math problem, and these were like 8-year-olds or 9-year-olds. And then she asked, who understands what I just laid out on the board? This is today's lesson. Who already understands it? And 5 or 6 kids stood up. And so then what happened was the other kids formed little circles around these standing kids, and the standing kids, with the teacher walking around the classroom helping them as kind of a teaching assistant, the standing kids taught their own peers, this is called peer teaching, taught their own peers the math equation, you know, the theory behind it, or how it worked. And as the kids who were sitting came to understand what was being taught, they stood up and joined the one who was teaching. And this continued through the hour of the class until every single kid in the class was standing. So it is possible to create classrooms where you have high levels of stimulation that work fine for the farmer kids, but are also uniquely helpful to the hunter kids. Another point that I make is that in the 1890s, when Horace Mann went off to Germany and got his PhD, it took him 6 months in education, and came back to the United States as an evangelist for the German system of public schooling. And the idea was, and he sold this to American industry, the first state to adopt this, the first city was Boston, and the first state was Massachusetts. And this was imposed on Boston by the Massachusetts legislature at the suggestion of Horace Mann in order to create good workers for the factories. This was how it was sold to the legislature, that this system will indoctrinate children in how to, they will stop being critical thinkers, they will stop being rabble-rousers, they will start being conformists, and they will learn how to stand in one place and put one bolt on one screw, you know, over and over and over again all day long. In other words, working in a factory or on an assembly line, although the assembly line at that point hadn't been, you know, fine-tuned by Henry Ford. That was in the 19-teens, but nonetheless, in the 1890s, this was Horace Mann's sales pitch, is you want to have a compliant workforce, you want to have an army where people don't question authority, where they do what they're told, you want to have, you know, citizens who do what they're told, you know, force them into mandatory public schools. Now, I'm a big fan of mandatory public schools, but I do believe that they should be reinvented in ways that are broader in their skill, you know, in their teaching techniques. And a lot of schools are, very innovative schools are doing this, and the teachers' unions encourage this kind of thing, by the way. But, you know, a lot of schools are just underfunded and way behind and under-resourced, and they're just, you know, way behind the curve. So my article over at hunterandafarmersworld.com about good German schools come to America is about how we can reinvent our schools to make them schools that work for all of our kids, and that we don't have to just go with Horace Mann's model of, you know, every 60 minutes there's a bell is rung and everybody gets up and moves, and everybody studies the exact same thing at the exact same time in the exact same way at the exact same pace, which bores the hell out of the really smart kids and sometimes leaves the not so smart kids in the dust, and you know, really only works to that kind of bell curve distribution middle, and in particular of the farmers within that bell curve. And so, you know, there's a lot that we can do around this. That was in May of 1996 that we went to Taiwan, and you know, I don't know that they're still doing it. I'm not sure how it works, but it was in the independent Taiwanese schools were referred to as anarchic. You know, anarchy. It's crazy. Well, no, actually, the kids actually learn an awful lot. And in fact, they noted in that independent article that the Taiwanese pupils are ahead of their British contemporaries. You can find it all over at hunterandafarmersworld.com. I'll be back with your calls after.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Your calls are next. Stay with us. Our book today is by Anita Hill. It's titled Believing, Our 30-Year Journey to End Gender Violence. And this is from the introduction. It's titled Boiling the Ocean. I am by nature a very private person, raised by a mother who is extremely private. People meeting my mother for the first time usually mistake her quietness for arrogance. They call me stuck up, my mother would say, but I'm not, she insisted. As an adult, I came to realize that this incredibly strong-willed mother of 13 was shy. When she was sure of something, we all knew it, and there was little chance of winning an argument with her. By we, I mean my father, my 12 siblings, and me. She was barely 5 feet 2 inches, remaining slight even after she gained weight in her middle age, but she seemed to tower over us. Her position as the youngest daughter of her farming parents' 14 children, and the determined woman who, from the day she married my easygoing father at 16, farmed alongside him to support our large family, seemed at odds with her shyness and her insistence on personal privacy. Life on a subsistence farm afforded little chance for solitude, let alone secrecy. But she claimed as much of it as she could and encouraged me and my 5 sisters to follow suit. I sometimes chalk up her wariness of exposure to the racialized world in which she grew up. My father, George, her brother, once told me bluntly, "If you talk about harm done to you, those people will use it against you." I understood that for that generation, those people were white folks. And though my mother was more subtle, I knew that her advice, "Don't ever share your personal business, people will judge you," was rooted in a similar understanding. Well, if you consider testifying about being sexually harassed in the workplace in front of an all-white male committee sharing your personal business, they were right about the outcome. For years, I had followed their advice, keeping to myself that I had been harassed into leaving my job as an advisor as the chair of the Equal Opportunity Commission, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. I shared with only a few friends that Clarence Thomas's behavior had been the main reason I'd left Washington and returned to Oklahoma. When I did tell, testifying at Thomas's Supreme Court confirmation hearing, people of all races judged me. In hate mail sent to my office at the University of Oklahoma, on talk radio, in magazines and books, face-to-face and over the phone, they confronted and condemned me. I was still struggling to regain my sense of equilibrium after being thrown into the public spotlight when a call came into my office one afternoon. Without thinking or measuring the risk that it could be another threat or vitriolic rant, I picked up the receiver. In a deep, grainy voice that seemed both hesitant and threatening, the caller warned me that I had opened up a whole can of worms. The caller never mentioned his name. Anticipating what I was sure would be a diatribe, I at first wanted to hang up the phone, but instead, perhaps responding to the hint of vulnerability in his voice, I listened as the caller recalled being molested by an uncle and what happened when he finally gathered the courage to tell his family. Rather than rallying to protect him, his parents had judged him and accused him of making up stories. The Senate Judiciary Committee's members' questioning of me, he said, had reminded him of his own family's dismissive reaction. The pain of the molestation and his relatives' condemnatory response, he said, has stayed with me for years. I mostly listened as he tried to make sense of his family's denial of their siding with his uncle. Surprisingly, though, our experiences differed. The hearing had affirmed his understanding of his own painful situation. It counseled him not to blame himself, putting his family's reaction in the context of a larger systemic and societal denial and taking away the sting of personal condemnation. To him, the whole can of worms that I had opened to the public was not limited to sexual harassment. It included incest, too. At the time, with my own pain still raw, I was guarded. Being open to hearing his story of survival was an act of courage on my part. No one had ever shared with me before that a family member had violated them. The caller's story was hard for me to hear, but not nearly as hard as it was for him to tell. And over the years, thousands have shared their experiences of abuse with me. The incest survivor imagined that my testimony would trigger feelings for survivors of other forms of abuse and show that sexual harassment is not the only problem. And he was right. Over the next months, letters describing behavior from workplace harassment to spousal abuse arrived every day alongside the hate mail, and I had to muster even more commitment and emotional bravery. In one ear were the denials, the warnings of the harms of accusations of sexual harassment, and challenges to the veracity of my claims. Some went as far as accusing me of inventing my entire testimony. In the other ear were the pleas for someone to see how society had abandoned victims of abuse. After a year of listening to countless stories of survival and attempts to survive, I became increasingly aware of the gravity of gender-based violence. In 1991, before the hearing, sharing experiences of gender-based violence was taboo. Yes, a few exceptionally courageous and forward-looking women sued in courts to stop harassment, but often the court reports reflected only a few of the details of the behavior they endured. Testimony was usually very curtailed. People who wrote to me told me things that they had never shared with their family members. Some had held their secrets for decades. A woman who I knew casually told me that she had been harassed by a former high school principal when she worked in the school office during World War II. The book by Anita Hill, Believing, Our 30-Year Journey to End Gender Violence. From international trade policy to immigration policy to housing, we've got all kinds of topics. The wars between Republicans and Democrats, the Republican efforts to induce fascism in the United States. A great selection of opinions will be found over at HartmannReport.com. You know, between 40 years of Ronald Reagan's neoliberalism destroying the American middle class and all the just horrors of January 6th and the Trump presidency, America's waking up, and that's a really good thing. There's actually, you know, some books coming out about this. Mine, The Hidden History of Democracy. Neil Howe's The Fourth Turning is here. And it looks like a moment of American renaissance is upon us, if our media doesn't screw it up, which raises the question, can we have democracy and Fox News? Can the two coexist? Like, you know, when Fox News runs chyrons saying that essentially Joe Biden is a wannabe dictator who's throwing Trump in jail because he's his political opponent. There's a whole rant about this and an in-depth analysis of what can we do with regard to repairing our media here in the United States over at HartmannReport.com. I think you'll find it interesting. Check it out. Welcome back. Picking up your calls here. George in Cripple Creek, Virginia. Hey, George, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, how are you doing? You know, talking about the threat that Putin and Russia represent. You know, read an article in either the Daily Mail or the Guardian. You know, the CIA is looking for recruits with critical language skills, and they mentioned Chinese and Arabic and several others, but not Russian or Ukrainian. And it takes a lot of time and effort to train competent Russian linguists. Mm-hmm. For example, I learned Russian at the U.S. Army Language School in Monterey, California, and the basic course ran 6 hours a day, 5 days a week for 47 weeks, and we learned primarily Russian military terminology, but also we study Russian history, geography, literature, everyday life. You know, we need Russian linguists now because of the threat posed by Putin. We have to be monitoring Putin and the Russians.
Well, and if Trump gets elected, we all may be speaking Russian.
Yeah, that's right. Well, I'll be back in demand then.
There you go, George.
But
one
interesting side, like when I worked for no such agency in 1991 when the Soviet Union collapsed, I retrained and learned Ukrainian and Belarusian.
Oh, you did? Wow.
Yeah.
That's I'm impressed.
Yeah, because, you know, there's some slight differences in the alphabets and grammar, but, you know, since they were two Slavic languages, it wasn't that much of a problem to learn them.
Is it like the difference between, you know, I'm guessing it's far more different than the difference between, like, you know, American English and Louisiana English, for example, you know, the deep South.
Right, yeah, like they do. Yeah, they have a few extra letters and things like that, but hey, one other thing, that Plot Against America, that's an excellent series.
Yeah, you've seen it.
Yes, on HBO.
Yeah, I thought that was...
The interesting thing was Charles Lindbergh that defeated FDR in the 1940 election.
Say what? Oh, in the movie.
Charles Lindbergh.
In the movie.
Defeated FDR in the 1940 election.
Right, in the movie.
Yeah, in the movie, right.
Yeah.
You know, he reoriented U.S. policy toward Hitler and all that, and that's why it, you know, wound up like being a Kristallnacht later in the series.
Yeah.
Everybody should watch that to see what fascism, how it could arise even here.
Now, that was the movie that takes place like in New Jersey or something, not the one that takes place in France,
New Jersey,
right?
Exactly.
Do you remember the name of the one that takes place in France that's about the guy who's trying to get out at the very end?
Yeah.
Transatlantic. Sean says it's called Transatlantic.
Transatlantic, that's it. Yeah, that was another excellent one.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a new kind of genre, but and I think we need more of them. People need to wake the hell up. Yeah, well said, George. You continue to amaze me.
Good work, and I'm listening to you either free speech or serious. If it was like, hey, if it wasn't for that, I'd be out in the wilderness.
Yeah. Well, thank you, George. Thank you for your kind words, and always nice to hear from you. Thank you for the call.
Yeah, same here, Tom. Right, bye.
Thank you. Lance in Montgomery, Alabama. Hey, Lance, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, how you doing there?
Good. What's up?
Good. Well, Tom, I called to find out if anything happening with our dear friend DeJoy, the postal guy.
To the best of my knowledge, we're still waiting on the Senate to confirm Biden's last two nominees to the Postal Board of Governors, who will then reach the critical mass that is capable of firing DeJoy.
Yes, because that would be really good.
So you might want to direct your inquiries to Chuck Schumer.
Chuck Schumer. Okay. And one last quick thing, Tom. Any chance you can get the DNC chairman as a guest?
Oh yeah, Jamie Harrison's been on the program many times. We'll be getting him back on. Absolutely. Is there a specific question you wanted to ask him?
Yes, because Florida is a really swing state, and they need to focus a lot on Florida as well as some other states.
Yeah, I'm with you.
That's why, they're losing. They're not getting the message out.
Well, and the whole abortion issue is going to be huge in Florida. I mean, DeSantis signed that 6-week abortion ban, and people are seriously pissed off about it. I think that, unless the voter suppression is as successful as Republicans think it's going to be, that there's a very, very good chance that this November, the election could just be a blowout for Democrats. It could be something on the order of the 1984 election for Republicans.
Well, let's hope that happens.
Yeah.
Thanks, Tom.
I'm with you. Thank you, Lance. Good talking to you. Mike in Philadelphia. Hey, Mike, what's on your mind today? You wanted to talk about Trump's stock?
Yes.
Go for it.
I'm trying to understand. So I'm no PhD in math, but, I was always taught, you only went public if you were proven to be profitable from the start, that you now can make more money and advance your business.
Right.
Here, I'm thinking this guy was $58 million in the red. Right out there, there were $58 million in the hole right out the back, and only turned a $4 million alleged profit. But then you go public, and I'm thinking, what am I missing here? Now, according to what I saw earlier today, they're down 14.36. They were like 26 last night. It closed. Now they're down to 22 and going down.
It's going to get below $1, Mike.
How do you do that?
Well, first of all, the $4 million was not their profit last year. That was their total revenue. They lost $48 million. So that means their expenses were $52 million, and they brought in $4 million, so they had a loss of $48 million. That tells me that company is, has got a negative net worth. So, arguably their stock price should be, they should pay you to take the stock. But
they're saying it right now.
Go ahead.
What I saw earlier in the news is that somehow his loyalists are buying into the stock.
Yeah, there's an
I'm shaking my head like.
And Raw's story about that today, about how the Trump followers are still buying the stock because they think that their money's going to go to Donald Trump, and it's rather pathetic. I mean, it really is. It's kind of sad.
But I'm thinking, but my thing is too, where is the SEC with this?
Securities and Exchange
to me, this is almost. Yeah, because I thought somebody said, if you look at this closely, I said, to me, this is like almost like had the. What is it? The signs of a pump and dump?
Yeah, this is a scam stock, and I think there's a large element of pump and dump to it. But my guess is that the SEC is not going after them, probably because Biden has told them not to. Just let Trump's investors Trump's investors suffer the consequences of their own stupidity. you know, I don't think he wants to be seen as interfering in Trump's businesses. So.
Wow. Well, you know what? This almost goes back to something as a kid coming up. You see the old term, I got a couple of bridges I'd like to sell you.
Yeah, exactly. You know, I've got this great bridge in Brooklyn that you might be interested in.
Or the Virgin Island of New York. Okay, thank you.
Mike, thanks a lot for the call. It's great to hear from you. We'll be back with more of your calls in just a moment. It's 43 minutes past the hour and change. It's the Thom Hartmann Program helping you win the water cooler wars. I'll be right back with your calls.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Taking back the mainstream media 3 hours a day, 5 days a week, right here. I'll be right back. And welcome back. Paul in Tampa, Florida. Hey, Paul, thanks for watching us on Free Speech. What's on your mind today?
Yeah, you know, during the break, your voiceover mentions America is waking up. I'd have to demur on that. In fact, I had a couple of guests over for dinner on the weekend that are medical doctors, and they're convinced that Biden was responsible for the Afghan pullout disaster. So I showed them the Doha Accords. I pulled it up on my phone and asked them to read the terms, and instead of that, they stormed out of the house. So in a rapacious and predatory capitalist country, we have people, of course, in poverty who can't afford to access the same institutions that teach them some critical thinking skills like the wealthy. But the problem isn't just with the poor. You know, since you were talking about consumer fraud with your guests, there's really a big issue today with that. We not only have an underclass of mentally handicapped idiots that are easily manipulated and defrauded by Fox fake news and right-wing media and the Republican Party. Basically, the red states have been reduced to government for morons, of morons, and by morons who believe that a guy who never had a real job in his life, had a life of nothing but butlers, limos, gold-plated toilets, high-priced hookers, and a life of royal opulence from birth, understands their world and identifies with the common man. You know, it's one thing to be indoctrinated to believe a myth about how he made the grade through his own personal brilliance and ingenuity, even though every one of the people who worked for him in the White House have declared he has the brain of a kindergartner. The thing is, these people aren't just motivated by stupidity. There's a seething hatred out there. It transcends basic stupidity. It's been burned into their minds virtually from birth, and it's seething hate and resentment. It's not just confined to stupid people anymore. Thanks to Fox and right-wing media, it's been spread like a deadly intellectual virus for 30 years, and it's infected practically every strata of our culture. So it's a very toxic situation, and there's no simple solutions. But the judicial system in this country has been stepping up in some cases to protect the Constitution, kind of, you know, with the Supreme Court notwithstanding. Unfortunately, they've got a very shaky record, and it's really sobering to consider they might be the only protection we've got left to protect us from total chaos. I mean, there's been thousands of people who are not only in jail, but have been irreparably harmed, and it's simply because they believed Fox News and Trump's BS and the conveyor belt of lies that are still rolling out of Trump's face. And yeah, let's face it, if you call yourself a news organization or you're the top officer of a U.S. government, you're under an obligation to inform the public honestly and provide the truth. Now, if we were a sane society, the Dominican voting machine lawsuits and Trump's legal issues would have been class action long ago, brought by all the victims of GOP propaganda and lies.
Yeah, I'm with you, Paul. And a great rant. Thank you very much for that. It's 48 minutes past the hour. I'll be back with you in 60 seconds. Stay tuned. It's the Thom Hartmann Program, the True People's Meeting. Help support progressive radio. If you're listening to us on a commercial station, call their advertisers and let them know you're listening. If you're listening to us on Pacifica, one of our many nonprofit stations, please support them when they do their fundraising drives. Thanks for supporting Progressive Talk Radio and tag you're it. So we have this major culture war going on in the United States. You've got Republicans trying to ban abortion. They're trying to ban books. Not just trying to, they're actually doing all of these things. Banning books, banning trans girls in sports, attacking basically the entire queer community. Whatever they can to try to sow division and hate, promoting Nazi memes, talking about how, Jews are paying to have black and brown people replace white people and all this kind of stuff. Why are billionaires doing this? Why are they funding these people? I mean, billionaires don't care about crime. They live in gated communities with private security. They don't care about public schools. Their kids go to private schools. They don't care about public transportation. They fly in private jets. Oh, yeah, that's right. If they can get us fighting against each other, if they can get us hating each other, we will ignore their efforts to cut their taxes and deregulate their industries. There's a whole video about it at tom.tv. Check it out. Welcome back. Picking up your calls here. Richard in Chicago. Hey, Richard, what's up?
Hi. Something about Gaza, but I just wanted to start with, because you mentioned something. Now, with the stock that came out, I tried to look up the NASDAQ requirements because I thought, as soon as the thing was released or within a day, they announced that it had big losses. And I was thinking, well, you shouldn't, don't they vet? Why can't I pretend I have a company and go public? You know what I mean?
Yeah, put it on the NASDAQ. Yeah.
Yeah, but here's the other thing. Have you ever verified the Hamas casualty numbers they put out? Because I've been trying to, and I saw something today. I just wanted to ask you if you have verified them that that they're even remotely accurate.
Nobody has or can, although the United Nations has asserted that those numbers are either accurate or conservative. I mean, if you destroy, if you reduce to rubble buildings that are mostly made out of stone, by the way, so when they collapse, they crush people to death. If you destroy, the majority of the buildings in a city that has more than 1 million people in it, you're probably going to have 30,000 casualties.
Tom, first of all, they're concrete buildings because I'm an architect. But the other thing, I mean, I'm not disagreeing with you, but I'm just making that point. Look, there are maps. I thought initially that you could look at from satellites and see graves being dug. We do it in Ukraine. But I saw today, for the first time, a statistical analysis of those numbers, and they are really suspect.
Yeah, I know. Israel's pushing this really hard right now through social media.
So here's the thing: is I would love it. I mean, a good thing for your program, get somebody on who's impartial, because I think that this is driving the narrative to a tremendous degree. Yeah. And Hamas is the only person issuing these things. And I know it's the horse is out of the barn. God forbid you would question these numbers.
Well, it's just there's nobody else on the ground there to come up with the numbers.
They what they've come up with is that there are days where it seems as if the incremental deaths are on a straight line. They graphed it out. They graphed out women versus children being killed. They graphed out Hamas soldiers. And look, I don't know. I'm not approving of what's happening at all. I am just saying that this whole country is going crazy with these numbers. All you see in the comment sections are everybody, Israel, Zionists, murderers, genocide, all of this stuff. Mm-hmm. On the numbers that Hamas that haven't really been verified. So I think it would be really interesting at some point to find out, how bad it is. And it's not. I'm not condoning it at all.
Well, if Israel killed 20,000 people, that's still a crime.
It is, and everybody does it. We did it, we're still doing it to people in Gitmo.
Yeah, we did it in Afghanistan and Iraq. You're absolutely right, but that doesn't that doesn't justify
Yeah,
it.
but I'm saying that there are people that look at these numbers and they look at women versus children. Some days there's no women and all children, and some days there's the numbers don't, according to these people, add up.
Yeah.
And if Israel.
I'm not the arbiter of this, Richard, and I get it. I'm not the arbiter of this stuff. I'm just just reporting what's being reported. Richard, from Richard to Richard in Bozeman, Montana. Hey, Richard, what's on your mind today?
So much is on my mind because I've been listening to this show for almost 3 hours, and there's always so many wonderful voices, Tom, including yours, so thank you.
Thank you.
As I listen from topic to topic, I was thrilled to hear from the lady from Idaho call in a little while ago.
Mm-hmm.
Initially, when I called in, I wanted to ask you this. Some friends of mine call it woo-woo. You familiar with that kind of term?
Yeah.
Like, I guess it's like magic or something,
Yeah.
When I and my wife or others that are friends start to just hear the voice of DJT, we don't feel good. We're quickly running to the mute button. And I start to have this image in my mind of the eagle's claw, a predatory bird that swoops down and grabs you. And it feels like just the sound of that man's voice now grabs me because of the way I feel about him. But I think it's grabbing other people. And I wonder if it's woo-woo, or is there some kind of a hypnosis, some sort of a power that is kind of unexplainable? And, how do we address that? And
it's called
the way
an
that
anchor, Richard, in psychology. When you, if you have a place where you regularly have really pleasant or really unpleasant experiences, and you visit that place, the emotion associated with those pleasant or unpleasant experiences comes back even before you experience anything, because that place has become an anchor for those feelings. And Donald Trump's voice, and you can be, and voices, sounds can be anchors, just like places can be anchors. So Trump's voice has become an anchor for a lot of us for basically disgust. I mean, it just reminds us of all the other awful stuff that he does. So that's what's going on. That's how it works. So there's an article, actually, if you go to wisdomschool.com, there's a whole article about how anchors work psychologically.
Yeah. And the press, what would, if out of comes Mr. Trump from the courtroom and he wants to talk and there's nobody there to listen, wouldn't that be nice?
Yeah, it would be. Well, there's only, about 100 pro-Trump people who are hanging out outside the courtroom. It's like his crowds have kind of given up on him, I think. So, that seems like a good sign. So, Richard, thanks for the call. You were going to say?
DDT. Did we get rid of DDT?
By and large.
Can we get rid of...
Yeah, the problem with DDT is that it is still being manufactured in other parts of the world, and it's still killing birds.
Yeah. Well, I want to get rid of DJT.
Yeah, well,
we can. Thank you, Tom.
Yeah, you're welcome. I think he's on his way out. I really do. And I think this trial is not going to help him. I think it's hurting him badly. Thanks so much for being with us today. We'll be back tomorrow, same time, same place. In the meantime, don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. It requires all of us, and that includes you. So get out there, get active, tag, you're it. Have a great afternoon. Be good to yourself and the people around you. Take good care of yourself. I'll catch up with you tomorrow.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free, and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the hartmannreport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com.
We say fight back!